Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the leather apron of a colonial American blacksmith in the 1750s, and fair warning, this is one of those lives where hard work isn't just a motivational poster slogan, it's a daily sentence your body serves with zero chance of parole. Picture yourself waking to complete darkness, knowing the next 14 hours will involve breathing smoke, wielding hammers that weigh more than a modern bowling ball, and turning raw iron into literally everything your community needs to survive. The forge doesn't care about your shoulder pain. Your customers don't accept "I'm tired" as an excuse, and you probably won't survive past 50 if the burns, back injuries, or lung problems have anything to say about it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this little community span the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rooster hasn't even considered crowing yet, but you're already awake. That's the thing about being a blacksmith in colonial America. Your body clock runs about 2 hours ahead of everyone else's, like some cruel biological tax for working with fire. You're lying on a straw mattress that's seen better decades, in the cramped quarters above your shop, and through the floorboards, you can already smell the faint ghost of yesterday's coal smoke. July in the colonies means you've been sweating even while sleeping, and the sheet stuck to your skin peels away with an almost audible squelch. Romantic, right? Your wife shifts beside you, and you try not to wake her as you swing your legs off the bed. Your feet find the rough wooden planks. No rugs up here. Those are for people with disposable income. And your knees make that delightful crackling sound that's become your morning theme song ever since you turned 35. You're 42 now, which in blacksmith years is approximately ancient. Your hands find your shirt in the darkness, and you're pulling it on when your shoulder reminds you about that awkward hammer swing from 3 days ago. The human body wasn't designed for repeatedly swinging metal objects at other metal objects, but nobody consulted anatomy textbooks when they invented this profession. The window shows nothing but darkness outside, maybe the faintest suggestion of pre-dawn grey if you're optimistic. Historians still argue whether colonial tradesmen actually enjoyed these early starts, or simply accepted them as unavoidable. But from where you're standing, hunched over trying to find your other shoe, enjoyment seems like a strong word. You're aiming to have the forge lit by the time the sun breaks the horizon, which means you need to be downstairs in the next 10 minutes. You descend the narrow stairs in darkness, each step creaking its own unique protest. The shop below is your kingdom, your prison, and your legacy all rolled into one soot-covered space. The anvil squats in its usual spot like a small metallic god demanding tribute. Your tools hang on the walls in organised chaos, hammers of every size, tongs sorted by jaw width, punches and chisels arranged by someone who apparently made their organisational decisions while suffering from heat exhaustion. That someone was you, last August. The forge itself dominates the room, a stone and brick structure that's basically a controlled volcano you've built into your workplace. Smart. Right now it's cold and dead, filled with yesterday's spent coals and ash, and looking at it fills you with that special kind of dread reserved for tasks you'll be doing every single day for the rest of your life. But here's the thing, that forge is also your livelihood, your family's food source, and the reason half the village doesn't fall apart at the seams. No pressure. You shuffle to the water barrel and splash your face, the shock of cold water doing more to wake you than any rooster ever could. The summer air already feels thick even at this hour, and you know that by midday this workshop will be approximately as pleasant as the inside of a bread oven. In February you'll miss this warmth. In February you'll stand as close to the forge as physically possible while your breath makes clouds and your fingers go numb between heatings. But right now, in July, the upcoming heat feels like a threat. Your leather apron hangs by the door, stiff with dried sweat and bearing the scorch marks of 1,000 near misses. You strap it on, the familiar weight settling across your chest and thighs like armour, which in a sense it is, armour against the sparks, the heat and the flying bits of scale that come off hot iron like tiny vengeful insects. The apron smells like you imagine hell might smell. Burnt hair, leather, smoke, and that particular metallic tang that never quite washes out no matter how many times your wife boils it. Outside, you can hear the very first birds starting their morning gossip. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. The village is still asleep, still dreaming of whatever colonial Americans dreamed about. Probably more sleep, honestly. But you're awake, you're vertical, and you're about to start the exact same routine you've started roughly 8,000 times before. Tomorrow morning, you'll do it again. The morning after that, same thing. This is the life you chose, though chose might be generous considering your father was a blacksmith and his father before him. So really this career picked you before you were old enough to have opinions about it. You roll your shoulders, feel them pop, and turn toward the forge. Time to wake the beast. The forge stares back at you like a cold, judgmental mouth filled with grey ash and dead coals. This is always the worst part, not the hours of hammering to come, not the heat, but this initial negotiation with fire itself. Because here's what nobody tells you about blacksmithing. You're not just working with metal, you're in a constant relationship with combustion, and combustion is a fickle partner with commitment issues. You start by reaching into the forge bed with your bare hands, sifting through yesterday's remains. The ash is cool now, soft as powder between your fingers, but buried underneath you're looking for clinkers, those glassy, fused chunks of impurities that formed when the coal burned. They're useless for burning and they block airflow, so out they come. Your fingers find one about the size of a walnut, and you toss it into the scrap bucket with a satisfying clink. There's always at least one clinker. Some days you find 3 or 4, like the forge is growing kidney stones. Beneath the ash layer, if you're lucky, there are still some partially burned coals from yesterday. These are gold. Well, black gold. You gather them carefully toward the centre of the forge bed, building a small nest right over the tuyere. That's the fancy French word for the pipe that delivers air from your bellows into the fire. Everything in blacksmithing has either a brutally simple name like hammer, or an unnecessarily complicated one like tuyere, and historians still argue whether this reflects the profession's mixed heritage of common labourers and medieval guild pretension. Now comes the charcoal. You head to the bin where you store it, ideally kept dry, though ideal and colonial America don't always share the same conversation. Your charcoal comes from old Thomas Wickham, who runs a collier operation about 6 miles west, and the man knows his business. Good charcoal burns hot and clean, bad charcoal burns cool and fills your shop with enough smoke to cure meat. You grab several large pieces, each one leaving black smudges on your fingers that'll take 3 days to fully fade, and arrange them carefully over and around your coal nest. The structure matters here. You're basically building a tiny wooden cabin, except with charcoal, and if you get it wrong, the whole thing collapses into a smouldering disappointment instead of the roaring inferno you need. Big pieces on the outside, smaller chunks toward the centre where your coals wait. You're creating pathways for air to flow while maintaining enough fuel density to sustain the heat. It's engineering, really, just the kind where mistakes make you restart instead of killing anyone. Usually, time for kindling. You keep a box of wood scraps, shavings, and bark strips specifically for this purpose, and you tuck a generous handful into the gaps in your charcoal structure. Some blacksmiths swear by different kindling materials: pine for quick ignition, oak for sustained heat. But honestly, you grab whatever's handy because you're not running a gourmet forge here. You're trying to make horseshoes before breakfast. The moment of truth. Fire. You strike your flint against steel. And yes, the irony of using a steel striker that you probably made yourself to start the fire, that lets you make more steel strikers, is not lost on you. Sparks shower down onto a small nest of char cloth you've positioned on a wood shaving. The char cloth catches, a tiny orange glow spreading across its surface like a slow-motion sunrise. You blow on it gently, coaxing it to life, and transfer it to your kindling pile. The wood catches first, small flames licking upward with that cheerful crackle that sounds so cozy in a fireplace, and so ominous when it's about to heat your workplace to somewhere between sauna and Dante's vacation home. Smoke rises, finding its way toward the chimney opening above the forge. Most of it, anyway. Some of it decides to hang around at face level because smoke is a jerk like that. Now the bellows. This is where your shoulders start their daily complaint. Your bellows is a large leather contraption that looks like an accordion designed by someone who hated musicians, and it's mounted to pump air through a pipe directly into the forge bed. You grab the handle and start working it, each pump sending a blast of air into the base of your growing fire. Pump, pump, pump. The rhythm is important. Too slow and the fire sulks along barely alive. Too fast and you scatter ash everywhere while hyperventilating your kindling into oblivion. The flames respond to the oxygen, growing more enthusiastic. The charcoal at the edges starts glowing at the tips, that gorgeous orange-red that means chemistry is happening. You keep pumping. Your right shoulder, the one that took a horseshoe to the joint 4 years ago when a spooked mare kicked at exactly the wrong moment, starts its familiar ache. You switch arms. Pump, pump, pump. The fire spreads, charcoal pieces igniting one by one like a slow-motion fireworks display. This is the boring part that somehow also requires complete attention. Stop pumping too soon, and the fire dies. Pump too long, and you waste charcoal burning hotter than you need. You're looking for that sweet spot where the coals have a solid bed of orange heat, white hot at the very centre, with enough fuel mass to sustain itself for a while once you stop actively encouraging it. Sweat is already forming on your forehead, and the sun isn't even up yet. The workshop is warming rapidly from its overnight coolness to something more like standing too close to a campfire temperatures. By noon, it'll be accidentally open the gates of hell temperatures. But let's take things one circle of Dante at a time. The fire stabilizes. You've got a solid coal bed now, glowing with purpose. You add a few more charcoal pieces to the outer edges, building up your fuel reserves for when you actually start working. The bellows get a few more pumps. Just maintenance breathing now, keeping things alive rather than trying to resurrect them. Your back is already protesting, and you haven't even started the actual work yet. This is just the morning ritual, the daily sacrifice to the gods of metalworking. But the forge is awake now, purring like a very dangerous, very hot cat. The beast lives, and you're officially open for business. You wipe your forehead, leaving a charcoal smudge you won't notice until your wife points it out tonight, and turn toward your workbench. Time to see what fresh torture the day has in store. The forge has been breathing for maybe 20 minutes when you hear the first footsteps outside. Right on schedule, Thomas Miller, who runs the mill about half a mile up the road, leading his draft horse around the side of your shop. You can hear the uneven clip-clop before you see them, that telltale rhythm of a horse with a loose shoe. Thomas appears in your doorway, hat in hand, looking apologetic in that way customers do when they're about to ask you to do something physically exhausting. "Morning," he says, though it's still dark enough that morning is more aspiration than fact. "Sorry to come so early, but Goliath here threw a shoe yesterday evening, and I've got grain to mill by noon." Goliath is a massive beast, probably 16 hands high, with the kind of patient expression that draft horses seem to be born with. You've shod this animal at least 40 times over the years, and he's a gentleman about it, unlike some horses you could mention who treat the shoeing process like you're attempting murder. You nod to Thomas and gesture him toward the hitching post outside. "Let's have a look." The horse is indeed missing his left front shoe, and the hoof looks fine. No cracks, no concerning wear. Just needs a fresh set of iron footwear. "All four while we're at it," you ask, because if you're going to fire up the forge for horseshoes, you might as well do a complete set. Thomas nods, already calculating how much this is going to cost him, and you're already calculating how much charcoal you'll burn through. Back inside, you select 4 shoe blanks from your stockpile. These are pre-formed iron bars, roughly shoe-shaped, that you've made during slow days specifically for moments like this. Some blacksmiths forge each shoe completely from scratch every time, but that's the kind of inefficiency that keeps you working until midnight. You've learned to batch your production, make 20 shoe blanks on a quiet Tuesday, then customize them to fit on busy mornings like this. You push the first blank deep into the forge bed, right where the coals are glowing their hottest. The bellows get a series of pumps and the fire responds enthusiastically, flames licking up around the iron. This is the part where you wait, watching the metal change colour like a very slow mood ring. The iron goes from grey to dark red to bright cherry red to orange, and you're aiming for that sweet spot where it's hot enough to shape but not so hot it starts throwing sparks like an angry firefly convention. While you wait, Thomas makes small talk about the weather, the harvest prospects, and whether the French are really massing troops to the north like everyone's been whispering about. Historians still argue whether frontier blacksmiths in the 1750s were genuinely worried about geopolitical tensions or just nodding along to customer conversation while thinking about hammering techniques, but you're definitely in the latter category right now. The blank is almost ready. You pull the glowing iron from the forge with your longest tongs, the ones with the wide, flat jaws perfect for gripping shoe stock. The metal is radiating heat like a tiny sun, and even at arm's length you feel it on your face. You move quickly to the anvil, that beautiful 150-pound chunk of steel that cost you more than 6 months' income when you inherited this shop and had to buy it from your father's estate. Worth every penny, though. A good anvil is the difference between precision work and just whacking metal and hoping for the best. The first hammer blow rings out across the shop, that distinctive ting that defines your entire profession. You're working the shoe into shape, flattening sections, curving the bar to match the rough arc you'll need for Goliath's hoof. Each strike is deliberate. You learned years ago that hammering harder isn't the goal, hammering smarter is. Guide the metal, don't fight it. Let the hammer's weight do most of the work while you focus on accuracy. The iron cools as you work, fading from orange back toward red. You have maybe 30 seconds of workable heat before it drops below useful temperature, so you're moving fast, checking the curve, adjusting, tapping the heels to flatten them where the nail holes will go. Back into the forge it goes for reheating. Pump the bellows, watch the colour climb, pull it out, back to the anvil. This cycle will repeat roughly 8 times per shoe, and you've got 4 shoes to make. Outside your shop, the village is starting to wake up properly now. You hear a door slam somewhere down the street. A woman's voice calls to someone, muffled by distance. A rooster finally gets around to his job, crowing with the enthusiasm of someone who forgot to set an alarm. The sky through your open door is shifting from black to deep blue to that pale grey that promises another scorching summer day. You're punching nail holes now using a pritchel, a specialised punch that creates the rectangular holes horseshoes need. The hot iron accepts the punch with satisfying ease, and you're working from the outer edge toward the centre. 4 holes per branch of the shoe, 8 holes total. This is delicate work despite the violence of hammering a punch through glowing metal. Get the spacing wrong and the nails won't hold properly. Get the angle wrong and you'll split the hoof when the farrier, which is you, by the way, because of course the blacksmith also has to install his own shoes, drives the nails home. The first shoe takes about 15 minutes from blank to finished product. You quench it in your water trough with a violent hiss and a cloud of steam that briefly makes your shop look like a budget dragon's lair. The metal goes from orange to black in seconds, and you're left holding a properly shaped hole-punched horseshoe that still needs fitting but is essentially done. 3 more to go. Thomas watches the process with the kind of fascination people always show when watching skilled tradesmen work. That mixture of appreciation and relief that they don't have to do it themselves. You don't blame him. You've been doing this for 27 years, since you were 15 and your father first let you make a complete shoe unsupervised, and some mornings you still look at the anvil and think about how many thousands of hammer strikes your shoulder has ahead of it today. The second shoe goes faster because you're warmed up now, in both the literal and figurative sense. Your rhythm is established, your muscle memory has kicked in, and the anvil is singing that steady ting, ting, ting that'll echo through the village for the next 12 hours. It's barely sunrise, and you're already making music. By the time you've finished all 4 shoes and are kneeling beside Goliath to actually fit them to his hooves, the sun has cleared the horizon and you're already thinking about your tools. Not in some abstract philosophical way, in the very specific way of noticing that the rasp you're using to level his hoof has maybe 3 months of life left before it's too worn to be useful. That rasp cost you 2 shillings from a travelling merchant last spring, which translates to roughly 3 days of hard work, and when it's done you'll need another one. This is the reality nobody mentions when they romanticize the blacksmith's trade. Your tools are slowly committing suicide every time you use them. The hammers hanging on your wall represent a family tree of metalworking. That crosspeen hammer, the one with the wedge-shaped end you use for drawing out metal, was your grandfather's. He brought it from England in 1710, and the handle has been replaced 4 times, but the head is original, worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. The ballpeen next to it you forged yourself when you were 17, and honestly it's a bit lopsided because 17-year-old you wasn't quite as skilled as you thought. You still use it though, because it's perfectly weighted for your grip, even if it looks like it was made by someone with a mild inner ear problem. Then there's the sledgehammer, the big one that requires 2 hands and most of your body weight to swing effectively. That beast cost you nearly 3 months' earnings from a merchant out of Philadelphia who specialised in Swedish steel tools. Swedish steel, the stuff is legendary for holding an edge and maintaining its shape under stress. Historians still argue whether the Swedish iron-making process was genuinely superior or just benefited from excellent marketing by Baltic traders, but you don't care about the geopolitics. That hammer drives stakes like the hand of God, and it'll probably outlive you. Your tongs collection looks like a strange family reunion where everyone has a different facial structure. You've got V-bit tongs for gripping round stock, flat jaw tongs for sheet metal, pickup tongs for small pieces, wolf jaw tongs for square stock, and about 15 other variations you've accumulated over the years. Some you inherited, some you made. One pair you won in a card game from a blacksmith in the next county who was either very drunk or very confident about a pair of fours. He was wrong about the fours. Each pair of tongs is specific to a particular task, and using the wrong tongs is like trying to eat soup with a fork. Technically possible, but unnecessarily frustrating. That pair with the long, thin jaws. Perfect for pulling small pieces out of the forge without burning your knuckles off. The heavy, wide-jawed ones. Those are for when you're wrestling with the kind of iron bar that could double as a murder weapon, and you need grip strength that would make a bear nod in approval. You finish, fitting Goliath's last shoe, driving the nails through the hoof wall at just the right angle so they curl out harmlessly instead of driving into sensitive tissue. The horse doesn't even flinch. He's a professional. You clinch the nails, file everything smooth, and Thomas hands you payment, a mix of actual coins and a promise to mill your grain at a reduced rate next month. This is how colonial commerce works. Money is great, but favours and barter keep the community wheel turning. As Thomas leads Goliath away, you return to surveying your tool situation. The pritchel you were using earlier is starting to mushroom at the striking end. That's what happens when you hammer on a punch repeatedly. Eventually it'll spread out like a tiny metal mushroom, and you'll have to heat it up and forge it back into shape or make a new one. Same story with your chisels, your drift pins, your nail headers, and basically everything that gets hit with a hammer, which is to say, everything. Your anvil tools sit within easy reach. Hardies that slot into the square hole in your anvil for cutting and bending, fuller tools for making grooves, swages for shaping curves. Each one represents hours of your labour creating tools to make your labour more efficient. It's tools all the way down, really. You use hammers to make tongs to hold metal, to make new hammers to make better tongs. The circle of metalworking life. Some tools you couldn't make if you tried. The files, for instance. Those precisely cut teeth require manufacturing techniques beyond what a single blacksmith can manage. You buy files from merchants who import them from specialists in England or Germany, and you pay through the nose for them because files are what transform rough metal into finished products. A good file is the difference between this gate latch works and this gate latch is a work of art that'll still be here in 100 years. Your favourite tool, though, is probably your hot cut, a chisel specifically designed to cut through hot metal placed on the anvil. You made it yourself about 10 years ago during a period when you were really bored and decided to experiment with different steel compositions. By some miracle of metallurgy or dumb luck, you got the carbon content exactly right, and the thing holds an edge like it's personally offended by dullness. You've offered to make copies for other blacksmiths, but honestly you can't remember exactly what you did, which is the frustrating reality of working with metal before modern metallurgical science. Sometimes you get magic, sometimes you get garbage. The universe doesn't explain which is which. Tool maintenance is its own full-time job that you somehow have to fit around your actual full-time job. Handles crack and need replacing. Metal surfaces rust if you look at them wrong in this humidity. Your grindstone for sharpening edges needs to be kept wet and level, which means someone, usually your apprentice when he remembers, has to drip water on it while you're grinding. The leather on your bellows dries out and cracks, requiring patches or complete replacement every few years. And then there's tool theft, which is a genuine concern. A good hammer or a specialised tong can walk off in the wrong person's hand, and suddenly you're out weeks of income or irreplaceable inherited equipment. You don't exactly have insurance in 1750s Colonial America. Your security system is lock the door and hope for the best, plus the knowledge that everyone in town knows everyone else's tools by sight, so a thief would have to leave the county to use anything they steal. You run your hand along the anvil's face, feeling the slight dish that's formed over decades of use right in the sweet spot where most hammering happens. Eventually this dish will become pronounced enough that you'll need a new anvil or some creative metalworking to build the surface back up. That's a problem for future you, though. Present you just needs to get through today with the tools you've got. The morning light is streaming through your door now, proper daylight, and you can see dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, lazy snowflakes. Your forge is humming along nicely, your tool situation is stable, and you've already completed your first job. Not a bad start. The anvil awaits. You hear him before you see him, the sound of someone trying to walk quietly and failing spectacularly. Samuel Fletcher, your apprentice, is attempting to sneak into the shop without you noticing he's 10 minutes late. The boy is 13 years old, gangly as a newborn deer, and possesses the stealth capabilities of a cow walking through a china shop. You don't turn around, just keep arranging tools on your workbench while he tiptoes past like you can't hear every single floorboard announcing his presence. "Morning, Samuel," you say, and he jumps about 3 inches. "Morning, sir," he mumbles, scurrying to hang up his coat. His face has that guilty flush that teenagers get when they've been caught doing something they knew was wrong but hoped would slide by unnoticed. You could lecture him about punctuality, but you've given that speech approximately 400 times in the past year, and honestly you've got metal to shape and limited energy for teenage life coaching. Samuel Fletcher came to you 11 months ago through the standard apprenticeship arrangement that keeps colonial trades functioning. His father paid you a fee, not much, but enough to cover the boy's food and the trouble of housing him, and signed a contract binding Samuel to you for 7 years. 7 years of teaching him everything you know about blacksmithing, in exchange for his labour, his obedience, and the theoretical promise that he won't burn down your shop through sheer adolescent incompetence. It's a system that's been working since medieval times, and historians still argue whether it's an elegant solution to skilled labour training or just sanctioned child labour with extra steps. The contract is specific. You provide room, board, and instruction in the art and mystery of blacksmithing. That's the actual legal phrasing. Like metalworking is some kind of mystical secret society. In return, Samuel works for you, obeys your commands within reason, doesn't drink excessively, doesn't gamble, doesn't marry without permission, and doesn't run away to sea or join the army. That last bit is actually written into the contract because apparently teenage boys have been trying to escape apprenticeships via military service for centuries. "Get the bellows going," you tell him, and he moves to the forge with the mechanical obedience of someone who's been given this exact instruction every single day for 11 months. Samuel grabs the bellows handle and starts pumping, and you notice his form has actually improved. When he first started, he pumped like he was trying to achieve liftoff. Now he's got a steady rhythm that keeps the fire happy without wasting effort. Small victories. The thing about having an apprentice is that they're simultaneously your greatest asset and your most probable cause of death. On good days, Samuel can handle the bellows, fetch tools, hold pieces steady while you work, and occasionally, very occasionally, complete simple tasks unsupervised. On bad days, he's a liability that makes you question whether human civilization was a mistake. Last week he left a punch in the forge bed where it heated up and then exploded when he quenched it improperly. The week before that, he nearly took his own thumb off with a badly aimed hammer strike. The week before that, he forgot to secure a piece he was holding, and it went flying across the shop like a very angry, very hot bird. But here's the paradox. You need him. Running a blacksmith shop alone is theoretically possible but practically insane. Someone has to pump the bellows while you're hammering. Someone has to run errands, deliver finished pieces, sweep up the endless metal shavings that accumulate like the world's most annoying snow. Someone has to hold the stock steady for drilling, manage the water barrels, sort scrap, and do the 1,000 small tasks that keep the operation running. Samuel does all of that, and in between, he's actually learning the trade. "Fetch me the 1/2-inch fuller," you tell him, and he retrieves it without having to ask what a fuller is. 6 months ago, he would have brought you a hammer. Progress is incremental but real. You set him up with his morning task, filing down a batch of nails you forged yesterday to remove the rough scale and sharp edges. It's mindless work, repetitive and boring, but it's also safe and necessary. Samuel settles onto his stool with the file and starts working through the pile. His technique is actually decent now, holding the nail firmly, pushing the file in smooth, even strokes, not trying to muscle through it. You remember teaching him this. Remember him fighting the file and getting nowhere. Remember the moment it clicked and his face lit up with understanding. That's the thing about apprenticeship that nobody talks about. You're not just teaching a trade, you're raising someone else's kid. You see Samuel more than his own father does. You're the one who noticed when he hit his growth spurt and needed new clothes. You're the one who has to decide when he's ready for more responsibility and when he's about to hurt himself. It's half education, half surrogate parenting, and you didn't exactly sign up for the emotional labour, but here you are. The boy has potential, though. He's got good hand-eye coordination when he's paying attention, and his understanding of heat colours is developing well. Yesterday you had him watch a piece of steel as it heated, and he correctly called out cherry red at exactly the right moment. Small thing, maybe, but reading metal temperature is literally the foundation of everything else in this trade. Get the heat wrong, and nothing else matters. How's your father's plough blade holding up, you ask, while you're working on your own project? A set of fireplace andirons for the minister's wife, who apparently decided her current andirons weren't fancy enough. Good, sir, Samuel says. He said it's the best blade he's had. You nod. That blade was actually Samuel's first major project under supervision. You let him do maybe 30% of the work, guided every hammer strike, corrected every mistake before it became permanent. But technically, he made it. The pride in his voice when he talks about it is unmistakable. And honestly, that's why you do this. Not for the contracted labour or the modest fee his father paid, but for those moments when a skill clicks into place and a kid realises he can make things that matter. Of course, then there are the other moments. Like right now, when you glance over and notice Samuel has somehow managed to file his own knuckle, bloody while working on the nails. He hasn't even noticed yet because he's that special combination of focused and oblivious that only teenagers can achieve. Samuel, your hand. He looks down, sees the blood, and his eyes go wide. It's not serious, just a scrape, really, but you're already moving to the water barrel to rinse it clean. This is another part of apprentice management. Basic first aid, constant vigilance, and accepting that teenage boys have a death wish that must be actively suppressed through eternal vigilance. You clean his knuckle, wrap it with a strip of cloth, and send him back to work with explicit instructions to pay attention to where his hands are in relation to sharp objects. He nods solemnly, having learned nothing, and will probably injure himself in a completely different way by noon. But that's the apprentice problem in a nutshell. You can't watch him every second, you can't do the work for him, and he's going to learn through mistakes that hopefully aren't fatal. The morning light is stronger now, illuminating the shop in that golden way that makes even mundane metalwork look almost magical. Samuel's file makes its rhythmic scraping sound. Your forge breathes steadily. The anvil waits patiently for your next project. You've got 6 more years with this kid. 6 more years of teaching and correcting and occasionally wanting to scream into the void. But you also remember being 15. Remember your own master's patience, or occasional lack thereof. And figure if you survived your apprenticeship, Samuel probably will too. Probably. Around mid-morning, you're interrupted by a wagon rattling to a stop outside your shop, and your heart does that little leap of joy mixed with dread that only happens when your material supplier arrives. This is Jacob Martin, who runs a supply operation out of the port town 30 miles east, and he's brought your quarterly iron shipment. The wagon bed is loaded with bars of pig iron, crude iron from England that looks like someone made metal loaves of bread and then beat them with ugly sticks. Pig iron gets its name from the casting process, where molten iron runs through channels into moulds that branch off a main runner, looking supposedly like piglets nursing. You've never actually seen this process. It happens in massive furnaces back in England or occasionally in the larger colonial operations. But you're the end user, the person who transforms these rough bars into functional objects. Each bar weighs anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds, and Jacob has delivered 12 of them, which represents roughly 3 months of your base material needs if you're careful. £2 sterling, 6 shillings, Jacob announces, and you suppress a wince. That's more than last quarter. Price went up in Philadelphia, something about shipping difficulties and the war talk making merchants nervous. You hand over the money from your strongbox, watching nearly 4 months of profit evaporate into raw materials. This is the economic reality of blacksmithing that nobody sees. You're not just charging for labour, you're fronting the cost of materials that take months to recoup through finished work. The pig iron sitting in your yard right now represents horseshoes not yet made, hinges not yet forged, tools not yet fashioned. Its potential locked in heavy, ugly metal bars. The quality varies too. Sometimes you get iron that works like a dream, consistent carbon content, minimal impurities, responds to heat exactly how you need it to. Other times, you get iron that fights you every step, full of slag inclusions and weird brittleness, and you're basically throwing charcoal into the forge just to wrestle bad metal into mediocre shapes. You can't tell which is which until you actually work it, and by then you've already paid. Historians still argue whether English iron quality in the 1750s was genuinely inconsistent, or whether colonial blacksmiths just complained about everything as a matter of professional pride, but you're pretty sure this bar you're examining has the structural integrity of hardened cheese. Jacob helps you unload. Well, you unload while he mostly supervises, and then he mentions almost casually that charcoal prices are also climbing. Thomas Wickham, your usual charcoal supplier, is apparently dealing with increased demand from 3 new blacksmith operations that opened in the region. Supply and demand in action, right here in Colonial America. You use somewhere between 20 and 40 bushels of charcoal per week, depending on how much work you're doing. A bushel costs you about 4 pence when times are good, 6 pence when Thomas decides he's got leverage. That's anywhere from 7 to 20 shillings per week just in fuel costs, before you've shaped a single piece of metal. The forge doesn't care about your profit margins. It eats charcoal with the indifferent appetite of a small god demanding tribute. After Jacob leaves, you're standing in your yard staring at pig iron bars when Martha Webb arrives carrying a live chicken. This is how you know your day is about to get complicated. Martha wants some pot mending done. Her large cooking pot has cracked along a seam, and she doesn't have money, but she does have livestock. Specifically, this chicken, which she's holding by the legs while it squawks indignantly and flaps its wings in that panicked way chickens do when they realise they are about to be bartered. This is a good layer, Martha assures you. 3 eggs just yesterday. You look at the chicken. The chicken looks back with beady-eyed judgment. You already have 4 chickens, and honestly you don't need a 5th, but Martha's husband died last winter and she's stretching every resource she has. This is where colonial economics gets personal. You can refuse payment in livestock and insist on coin, which would be perfectly reasonable, or you can take the chicken and accept that sometimes being part of a community means your payment plan involves poultry. Deal, you tell her, and she lights up with relief. I'll have your pot ready by tomorrow. Samuel helps you carry the pig iron bars inside while the chicken, whom you've already mentally named Margaret for reasons you can't explain, settles into your yard with suspicious ease. This is your supply chain. English iron delivered by a middleman at inflated prices, charcoal from a local collier whose rates fluctuate with the market, and payment that's roughly 60% actual money and 40% goods, services, and livestock. You keep meticulous records in a ledger book that's become a historical document of colonial barter economy. John Pierce, 1 brass door handle, payment, £4 mutton. Thomas Webb, plough repair, payment, half cord firewood. Sarah Fletcher, 6 nails, payment, 1 loaf bread, and promise of future mending work. It reads like a recipe book written by someone who couldn't decide between cooking and accounting. The cash transactions are simpler, but not necessarily better. Colonial currency is a confused mess of English pounds, Spanish dollars, local scrip, and occasionally people just weighing silver by the ounce. You've had customers try to pay you in wampum, in tobacco promissory notes, and once, memorably, in a share of a pig that didn't exist yet because it was still gestating. That one took 3 weeks to sort out and ended with you owning a quarter interest in a pig named Charles. Your material costs aren't just iron and charcoal. You need flux for welding, usually crushed borax or sand, which you buy from the general store. You need sal ammoniac for cleaning copper work. You need beeswax for waterproofing containers and occasionally treating tool handles. You need leather for apron repairs, gloves, and bellows maintenance. You need files, which wear out and can't be resharpened effectively. You need grinding stone grit to keep your sharpening wheel effective. Every single input costs money or barter, and you're juggling all of this while also trying to maintain a family, pay taxes to the colonial government, and save something for emergencies. An illness could bankrupt you. A fire could destroy everything. Your margin between comfortable living and genuine hardship is roughly the width of 2 good work months. The pig iron sits in your storage area now, waiting to be transformed. Margaret the chicken is investigating your yard, probably planning her escape. Samuel has gone back to filing nails, and you're updating your ledger with Jacob's delivery, watching your careful financial buffer shrink. Tomorrow you'll need more charcoal. Next week the bellows leather needs reinforcing. Next month, who knows? You close the ledger and return to the anvil. The metal won't shape itself, and Margaret isn't going to lay enough eggs to pay for your iron habit. By noon, your shop has transformed from uncomfortable to what fresh hell is this? The July sun is directly overhead, beating down on your roof with malicious intent, and the forge, which is already a contained inferno, has turned the entire workspace into what you imagine standing inside a bread oven feels like. Except the bread is you, and you're slowly cooking from the outside in. Sweat isn't dripping anymore, it's sheeting off you in waves. Your shirt gave up on any pretense of dryness about 2 hours ago, and now clings to your back like a wet, salty second skin. The leather apron, which seemed like sensible protective gear this morning, has become a personal torture device that traps heat against your chest and weighs approximately 900 pounds. Your hair is plastered to your forehead, sweat stings your eyes, and every breath feels like you're inhaling from a tea kettle, and you're making hinges. Specifically, strap hinges for the new church door, because Reverend Thompson decided the old ones weren't substantial enough for a proper house of God. He wants heavy-duty hinges that'll hold a thick oak door for the next century, which means you're working with iron bars that are 3 inches wide and 1/4 inch thick. These aren't delicate little cabinet hinges. These are the medieval castle door-level hinges that require real muscle and extended forge time. You've got the first bar heated to orange, and you're drawing out the end to create the decorative curl that'll eventually wrap around the pin. Each hammer strike sends vibrations up your arm, and you can feel sweat literally flinging off your elbows with every swing. The metal is responding well. At least there's that. Some days the iron fights you, but today it's being cooperative, flowing under your hammer like it actually wants to become a hinge. Small mercies. Samuel is managing the bellows, pumping steadily, and the poor kid looks like he's melting. His face is beet red, and he's got that glazed expression that comes from heat exhaustion, beginning to whisper its sweet promises of unconsciousness. You make him stop every few minutes to drink water from the barrel you keep, specifically for this purpose. Historians still argue whether colonial blacksmiths actually understood hydration science, or just noticed that people who didn't drink water in hot forges tended to fall over, but the result is the same: drink or drop. The metal cools quickly in this heat. Wait, that sounds backwards, but it's true. The differential between forge temperature and air temperature is smaller in summer, so the iron doesn't hold working heat as long. You're reheating more frequently, which means more charcoal consumption, which means more money literally going up in smoke. Winter has its own challenges with frozen fingers and drafty shops, but at least the metal stays hot longer, and you're not worried about dying of heat stroke while making door hardware. You're working on the pintle now, the pin part that the hinge strap will swing on. This needs to be perfectly straight and smoothly tapered so the door actually swings without binding. You're using a combination of hammer work and your swage block, working the hot iron through progressively smaller grooves to achieve a consistent taper. It's finicky work that requires concentration, which is challenging when sweat keeps dripping into your eyes and your brain is gently suggesting that maybe lying down for a while would be a great idea. The church hinges are taking up your entire midday, but they're also a prestigious commission. Everyone in the village will see these hinges every Sunday, and if they work perfectly, nobody will notice them. If they squeak or bind or, God forbid, fail, everyone will know you made them and your reputation takes a hit. No pressure, just craft hardware that'll be judged by an entire congregation for decades while you slowly cook in your own juices. Around 1 o'clock, your wife Margaret appears with a bucket of small beer and some bread. Small beer is the colonial American solution to don't drink the water because it might kill you. It's low-alcohol beer that's safe to drink and provides calories. It tastes like someone thought about beer and then forgot what they were thinking about, but it's wet and it won't give you cholera, so you're not complaining. You gulp down a full mug while Margaret surveys the shop with the expression of someone who's given up on her husband's workplace ever being clean. You're going to die of the heat, she observes, which is possibly true but also not helpful. Probably, you agree and go back to hammering. The bread helps. Food is important when you're burning thousands of calories whacking metal in a sauna. You eat standing up, one hand still holding tongs because you've got a piece in the forge that needs attention, cramming bread into your face like a man who's forgotten that chewing is traditionally part of the eating process. Margaret shakes her head and leaves, taking the bucket with her. The afternoon stretches ahead like a prison sentence. You've got 3 more hinges to forge, and each one takes roughly 2 hours of focused work. The heat isn't getting better. If anything, it's getting worse as the day peaks. Your shop faces east-west, which means the afternoon sun comes straight through your door like it's personally angry at you. There's no shade, no relief, just endless heat, and the hammer, and the anvil, and the relentless ting-ting-ting that echoes in your skull. Samuel looks like he might actually faint. You send him outside to sit in what passes for shade and take over the bellows yourself. This is less efficient. You can't hammer and pump simultaneously, but it's better than explaining to his father why you let his son die of heat stroke while making church hardware. You work in spurts, pump the bellows to get the iron hot, pull it out, hammer frantically for 30 seconds, back into the forge, pump, some more. It's exhausting and inefficient and absolutely the reality of summer blacksmithing. The second hinge is taking shape. The strap is curled, the pintle is tapered, and you're working on the mounting plate where the screws will attach it to the door frame. This needs to be flat and smooth with properly punched screw holes, and you're doing it all while your vision occasionally swims from the heat, and your hands are so slippery with sweat that gripping the hammer is becoming a legitimate challenge. But the hinge is coming together. Despite everything, the heat, the exhaustion, the sweat, the knowledge that you've got hours more of this ahead, the iron is becoming what you need it to be. That's the thing about blacksmithing that keeps you doing it despite the brutal conditions. You start with a rough bar and end with something functional and beautiful. The metal doesn't care that you're uncomfortable. It just responds to heat and pressure and skill. And if you apply those correctly, you get hinges that'll hold a church door for 100 years. The forge breathes, the hammer sings, and you keep working. The church hinges are temporarily set aside, one finished, two in progress, because William Porter has just arrived with a broken plough blade that apparently couldn't wait another hour. This is your life. You're never just working on one thing. You're juggling 6 projects in various states of completion, while new requests pile up like snow that never melts. William's plough blade has a crack running 3 inches from the edge, and he needs it fixed by tomorrow because the ground is perfect for turning right now, and every day of delay cost him planting time. You're the community lifeline, whether you wanted the job or not. When something metal breaks, bends, or needs creating, there's exactly one person within reasonable travelling distance who can help, and that person is currently sweating through their 4th shirt of the day while trying to remember if you've eaten lunch yet. The answer is yes, technically, if you count cramming bread into your face while holding tongs as eating. Farmers need you constantly. Plough blades dull, break or snap under the stress of hitting rocks hidden in colonial soil. Hoes need reshaping, scythes need sharpening, chain links break, ox shoes wear through. Every agricultural implement eventually requires your attention, because metal, despite its reputation for durability, is actually a high-maintenance material that slowly commits suicide through use. William's plough blade is just today's agricultural emergency. Yesterday it was a broken harrow tine. Tomorrow it'll probably be something else that needs immediate attention, or someone's entire harvest is at risk, no pressure. Housewives, well, women who run households, which is basically every woman because colonial division of labour is not subtle, need you for different reasons. Pots crack along seams from years of heating and cooling, fire pokers bend, pot hooks break, candlestick holders get damaged, scissors lose their edge. You spend probably 20% of your time on household item repairs, which sounds tedious, but actually pays well because a broken pot is an emergency when you've got a family to feed and pots are expensive to replace. Just last week, Elizabeth Carter brought you a brass warming pan that had developed a hole. Warming pans are those long-handled devices for holding hot coals that people slide between bed sheets in winter to make sleeping less hypothermia-inducing. The hole meant coals could fall out onto bedding, which meant potential fire, which meant you bumped her repair to the front of the queue because explaining to the village why you let someone's house burn down because you were too busy making decorative hinges seemed like a bad career move. Then there's the militia work, which has gotten more frequent with all the nervous talk about French troop movements to the north. Every able-bodied man in the colony is theoretically part of the militia, and they all have weapons that need maintaining. Musket locks break, bayonets dull or chip, swords need sharpening, though swords is generous for what most colonial militia carry, which are basically long knives with aspirations. Still, you sharpen them, repair them, and occasionally forge new ones when someone's weapon is beyond saving. Captain Bradford was here 3 days ago with a list of 20 muskets needing lock repairs. 20? You're still working through them between other projects. Each lock is a small mechanical puzzle of springs, catches, and the flint-holding mechanism, and if you get any of it wrong, the musket either won't fire or will fire accidentally, and neither option is popular with the person holding it. Historians still argue whether colonial blacksmiths were truly skilled gunsmiths, or just desperate generalists who figured out lock repair through trial and error and prayers. but you're definitely in the latter category. The wheelwright needs you because iron tire hoops for wagon wheels wear out and need replacing. The carpenter needs you to make nails, hinges, and the occasional decorative iron strap for furniture. The cooper needs barrel hoops in various sizes. The butcher needs hooks, cleavers sharpened, and that one large cleaver repaired after he dropped it and chipped the blade. Even the town drunk needs you occasionally. Last month he brought in a bent flask he wanted straightened, and you're still not sure how he managed to bend solid pewter into that particular shape. But you fixed it because money is money. Children show up with broken toys, usually hoops that have lost their iron rolling rings, or the metal parts of whatever colonial kids played with when they weren't working in fields. You usually fix these for free or for a piece of pie because you're not a monster, and also because those children's parents are your paying customers. Community goodwill is its own form of currency. Samuel has recovered enough to return to the bellows, and you've got him pumping while you work on William's plough blade. The crack needs to be heated and forge welded, which means getting both edges of the crack glowing white hot, applying flux to prevent oxidation, and then hammering them together to fuse into a single piece again. It's delicate work. Too cold and they won't weld, too hot and you burn through the metal, wrong angle and you make the crack worse. You've done this hundreds of times, but it's still nerve-wracking because if you fail, William's ploughing schedule is ruined and you've wasted expensive material and time. The weld takes. You can feel it in the way the hammer blow sounds, a solid ting instead of a hollow tonk that would indicate the pieces aren't properly fused. You work the area smooth, blending the repair so it's not an obvious weak point, and quench the whole blade carefully to avoid introducing new stresses. William will have his plough blade tomorrow, and the community continues functioning because you successfully smashed hot metal together in exactly the right way. This is the weight nobody mentions when they talk about trades. You're not just making things, you're keeping an entire community operational. When you're sick, injured, or just behind on work, there's a ripple effect. Farmers can't plough. Militia can't maintain weapons. Households struggle with broken implements. The village doesn't have a backup blacksmith or a supply chain that delivers replacement goods overnight. They have you, your forge, your skills, and your increasingly questionable shoulder joints. You look at your workbench, at the queue of items waiting for attention. Church hinges, militia musket locks, 3 pot repairs, a set of nails someone ordered, cabinet hinges for the school teacher, a broken axe head that needs a new eye forged, and that's just what's physically here. That doesn't count the verbal promises you've made or the projects people will bring tomorrow. The anvil waits, the community needs, and you hammer on. Around what you estimate is 4 o'clock, you don't own a clock because they cost approximately 1 year's income, your wife calls you upstairs for dinner. Dinner, in colonial terminology, means your main midday meal, though you're taking it late because William's plough blade emergency pushed everything back. You climb the narrow stairs with legs that feel like they've been replaced with bags of wet sand, and enter your living quarters, which exist in that awkward overlap of home and directly above a forge. The room is covered in a fine layer of black soot that Margaret wages eternal war against and loses daily. She's wiping down the table as you enter, and you can see the cloth coming away grey even though she probably cleaned this exact surface 3 hours ago. The soot gets everywhere, on the furniture, the walls, in the bedding, probably in your lungs, though nobody's invented x-rays yet to confirm. Your children's faces have a permanent smudge quality that makes them look like tiny chimney sweeps, and Margaret has given up on keeping the windows open, because open windows just means soot distribution accelerates. Sit, she commands, and you sit because arguing with your wife about when to sit in your own home is a battle you learned to stop fighting approximately 7 years ago. Dinner is cornmeal mush that's gone cold, which is fine because hot mush and cold mush taste roughly identical, like someone thought about flavour and then decided against it. There's also a chunk of salt pork that's been boiled into submission, some wilted greens from the garden that Margaret grows in the small plot behind the shop, and a heel of bread from this morning that's already going stale in the humidity. You wash it all down with small beer that's somehow warm despite being stored in the coolest part of the house. This is actually a decent meal by colonial standards. You're not wealthy, but you're not starving either. The cornmeal comes from Thomas Miller's mill. Remember Goliath and his new shoes? That's part of your barter economy at work. The salt pork represents your winter provisions, carefully rationed throughout the year. The greens are free if you don't count Margaret's labour in growing them, which nobody does because women's agricultural work somehow doesn't count in the colonial economy despite being literally how everyone stays alive. Margaret sits across from you with 3-year-old William on her lap. Yes, you named your son after your father, who was also a blacksmith, because originality in naming is apparently not a family strength. Your daughter Sarah, who's 5, is playing in the corner with a cornhusk doll that's seen better days. The family portrait would be touching if you weren't all covered in a film of soot and smelling like a chimney fire. Mrs. Porter asked if you'd finished her pot yet, Margaret mentions casually, which is wife code for Mrs. Porter cornered me in the street and complained about you. You shovel mush into your mouth and grunt non-committally, which is husband code for I'll get to it when I get to it, and please don't add to the mental list of things I'm already stressed about. And the Fletcher boy bled on the floor again, she continues, 3rd time this week. Samuel's safety record is apparently a household talking point. You make a mental note to lecture him about bleeding in moderation, or at least cleaning up after himself when he does. The shop floor has blood stains that are becoming geological features at this point. Historians still argue whether colonial apprentices were genuinely accident-prone, or whether working with sharp, hot metal in a pre-safety regulation environment just naturally resulted in frequent minor injuries. But you're living the answer. It's both. Little William grabs at your food, and you let him have a piece of bread because feeding your children seems like one of those bare minimum parenting requirements. He immediately drops it on the floor, the soot-covered floor, and Margaret retrieves it with the weary efficiency of someone who's retrieved approximately 8,000 dropped items this week alone. She wipes it on her apron, which is already filthy, and hands it back to him. The 5-second rule hasn't been invented yet, but the general principle of a little dirt won't kill them is very much alive and well. Sarah wanders over and climbs onto your lap, which would be sweet except your lap is currently occupying a chair, and your back is already screaming from hours of forge work. She's warm, slightly sticky for reasons you don't want to investigate, and smells like a combination of child sweat and that indefinable, we live above a blacksmith shop aroma that you've stopped noticing on yourself but definitely notice on your children. Papa, are you making nails today? She asks, because apparently your daughter's idea of fascinating conversation topics is metallurgical processes. Tomorrow, you tell her, which is a lie because you have no idea when you're making nails, but I have no idea isn't a satisfying answer for a 5-year-old. Margaret is listing her own day's work. Laundry, cooking, child-minding, tending the garden, feeding the chickens. Yes, Margaret the chicken has joined the flock, and the name confusion this creates is briefly amusing until it's not. She also mentions that the roof is leaking again above the bedroom, which is about the last thing you want to hear because roof repair means taking time away from paying work to fix your own infrastructure, and time is literally money when you're paid by the piece. Your dinner break is roughly 20 minutes of sitting, eating, and absorbing family updates about problems you'll have to solve later. Then you're standing, kissing Margaret on the forehead, ruffling Sarah's hair, avoiding little William's grabby hands, and heading back downstairs where Samuel is supposedly watching the forge, but is probably doing literally anything else. The stairs creak. The shop air hits you like walking into a warm, sooty hug. Samuel is, in fact, not watching the forge. He's examining a horseshoe like it's a particularly interesting piece of abstract art. You don't even have the energy to lecture him. The anvil waits. The hinges need finishing. And somewhere in this building, your family's living in a home that's perpetually covered in the byproduct of your profession. You grab your hammer. Back to work. The afternoon brings what you've come to think of as the customer avalanche. That period between dinner and evening when everyone who's been putting off their blacksmith visit suddenly remembers they desperately need your services right this second. First through the door is Henry Ashford, the wealthiest landowner in the area, who arrives in a manner that can only be described as unnecessarily grand for someone visiting a soot-covered metalworking shop. Henry owns approximately 2,000 acres, has servants, and enjoys reminding everyone of these facts through his general demeanour and clothing choices. Today he's wearing a waistcoat that probably cost more than your anvil, and he's stepping carefully around your shop floor like the metal shavings might spontaneously ruin his buckled shoes. He wants decorative fireplace tools, specifically a poker, tongs and shovel with ornamental finials, because apparently his current fireplace tools don't adequately communicate his social status to visitors. Something with scroll work, he says, gesturing vaguely. Perhaps acanthus leaves? I saw something similar in a Philadelphia drawing room. You nod while mentally calculating how much to charge someone who uses phrases like Philadelphia drawing room. The answer is more than usual, Henry can afford it, and frankly, ornamental scrollwork is finicky, time-consuming work that requires heating metal to specific temperatures, working it with specialized tools, and achieving symmetrical decorative elements that look effortless, but take hours to execute. This is art masquerading as function, and art costs extra. 2 weeks, you tell him, and he looks mildly affronted that you can't drop everything to make fancy fire pokers for his mansion. I've got church hinges, militia repairs, and about 15 other projects ahead of you. He harumphs but accepts your timeline because there's literally no one else within reasonable distance who can do this work. That's the beautiful part about being a skilled tradesman in a sparsely populated area. You have a monopoly, which means you can occasionally tell wealthy landowners that their decorative fireplace accessories will have to wait behind the farmer's plough blade. Economic democracy through scarcity. Henry leaves, and before you can even return to your current project, Robert Hayes, the wheelwright, appears with a cart full of wagon wheels in various states of needing your attention. Wheelwrights and blacksmiths are in a perpetual symbiotic relationship. He makes the wooden wheels, you make and fit the iron tire hoops that hold them together and protect them from wear. It's like a very specific, very colonial version of a buddy cop movie, except instead of solving crimes, you're just keeping wagons functional. Need 6 tire hoops, Robert announces, already unloading wheels. Standard size for farm wagons. Can you have them ready by week's end? Tire hoops are straightforward but tedious work. You measure the wheel's circumference, cut a length of flat iron stock slightly shorter. It needs to shrink fit when cooled. Heat it until it's glowing. Bend it into a perfect circle using your bending forks and the anvil's horn. Weld the ends together, and then heat the whole thing until it expands. Fit it onto the wooden wheel while it's hot and quench it so it contracts and grips the wood with forces that would make a python jealous. Multiply by 6 wheels, and you're looking at a solid day's work, minimum. I'll get them done, you agree, because Robert is a good customer who pays in actual money and doesn't negotiate your prices like he's haggling at a Persian bazaar. You set his wheels aside, stacking them near the door where you won't forget about them, and that's when young Timothy Miller runs into your shop with the breathless panic of a messenger bearing urgent news. "Mr. Davies needs you," Timothy gasps out. His ox threw a shoe 3 miles out on the north road, and he can't get the animal home without it. Ox shoeing is the worst. Oxen are larger than horses, more stubborn, and their hooves are cloven, split down the middle, which means each foot requires 2 shoes instead of 1. An ox that's thrown a shoe 3 miles from town means you're packing up portable tools, hiking out there in the afternoon heat, and shoeing an animal in whatever makeshift workspace you can create on the roadside. This is the blacksmith equivalent of a house call, and it's exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. But John Davies is a good man who's probably standing on the North Road right now, with an immobile ox and a growing sense of agricultural despair, so you're already gathering tools. Small portable anvil, really just a hardy stake you can drive into the ground. Hammer, tongs, rasp for hoof work, nails, and 4 pre-made ox shoes from your stock, because you learned years ago to keep common sizes on hand specifically for emergencies like this. "Samuel, mind the forge," you tell your apprentice, which is optimistic at best and potentially disastrous at worst, but you can't leave it burning unattended and you can't afford to let it die, and have to rebuild it from scratch when you return. Don't touch anything, don't make anything, just keep it breathing. He nods with the confidence of someone who has no idea how many ways this could go wrong, and you're hiking up the North Road with 40 pounds of tools slung over your shoulder like the world's least entertaining camping trip. 3 miles in July heat, even in the late afternoon, is an exercise in questioning your life choices. You're sweating through your shirt again. 3rd or 4th time today you've lost count, and the tools are getting heavier with each step. You pass fields where people are working, and they wave or nod, and you wave back while thinking about how they're at least standing still in their misery while you're actively walking toward yours. You find John Davies exactly where Timothy said he'd be, standing beside his ox. A massive creature named Samson who looks entirely unconcerned about the situation. The ox has thrown his left front shoe, and John looks like a man who's been standing in the sun for an hour, trying to decide if walking 3 miles for help or just abandoning the ox and his cart full of grain was the better option. "Thank the Lord," John says when he sees you, which is flattering but also pressure, because you're not actually divine, just a man with tools and knowledge, and if this doesn't work, you're both still stranded 3 miles from town. You set up your portable anvil, driving the stake into the hard-packed earth at the roadside. Samson eyes you with bovine suspicion. Shoeing an ox is always a negotiation between human determination and animal stubbornness, and right now you're hoping Samson is one of the cooperative ones. John helps you lift the hoof, oxen feet are heavy and they know it, and you start cleaning and trimming the hoof with your rasp. The sun beats down, sweat drips into your eyes. Your back protests the awkward angle required for roadside hoof work, but the shoe fits. You drive the nails, clinch them properly, and move on to the second half of the cloven hoof. Historians still argue whether colonial blacksmiths genuinely enjoyed the variety of their work or just accepted misery as a professional constant. But crouching on a dirt road shoeing an ox while the afternoon sun slowly bakes you like a human pie strongly suggests the latter. You finish all 4 shoes, both halves of both hooves that needed attention, and John pays you in a mix of coins and a promise of grain delivery next week. You gather your tools, wave goodbye, and start the 3-mile walk back to your shop, wondering what fresh disasters Samuel has created in your absence. The afternoon is almost over. Your queue has grown by multiple projects, and somewhere in your shop your forge is either still alive or Samuel has accidentally created a minor catastrophe. You'll find out soon enough. You return to find Samuel has not miraculously burned down the shop. The forge is still alive, breathing steadily, and nothing appears to be on fire that shouldn't be. You count this as a victory and make a mental note to acknowledge his competence, though not too enthusiastically because teenage egos are fragile things that become insufferable when overfed with praise. The rest of the afternoon shifts into different territory, the delicate work that nobody associates with blacksmithing until they need it. Henry Ashford's ornamental fireplace tools are one thing, but you've also got a lock repair waiting that requires the kind of precision most people don't realise metalworking involves. Locks are the intersection of metallurgy and mechanical engineering, wrapped in the need for security, and they're finicky little bastards that require patience you definitely don't have after hiking 6 miles in the heat. The lock in question belongs to Dr. Morrison, and it's a warded lock for his medicine cabinet, the kind with internal obstructions that only the correct key can navigate. Someone, probably one of his children, though he didn't specify, has broken the key off inside the lock mechanism, which means you need to extract the broken piece, examine the damage, potentially repair the internal wards if they're bent, and either fix the broken key or forge a new one. This is surgery, just with metal instead of flesh. You set up at your workbench rather than the anvil because this requires good light, magnification. Well, not literal magnification because eyeglasses exist, but magnifying lenses are expensive, so you're just squinting really hard, and tools that look more like torture implements for mice than blacksmithing equipment. Needle files, tiny punches, wire picks, and the patience of someone who's already exhausted, but has bills to pay. The broken key piece comes out after 15 minutes of careful picking and occasional cursing under your breath. You examine it in the afternoon light streaming through your window, turning it over to see where the break occurred. The shank snapped right at the shoulder where it meets the bit, the part with all the wards and cuts that actually operates the lock. This is a stress fracture from years of use, the metal finally giving up after being twisted thousands of times. Forging a replacement key is an art form that requires understanding how locks work mechanically. You've got the broken piece as a template, which helps, but you need to match the profile exactly, or the new key won't operate the lock. You start with a small piece of iron stock, heating it carefully because these small pieces lose heat almost instantly. The work happens in short bursts. Heat, hammer a bit, back to the forge, heat, file some more, check the fit, repeat approximately infinity times. The bow, that's the fancy word for the decorative loop you hold when turning a key, needs to be shaped and pierced. You're creating a simple oval today because Dr. Morrison didn't specify wanting anything elaborate, and you're not about to do extra decorative work for free. The piercing requires heating the stock and using a small punch to create the hole, then filing it smooth so it doesn't catch on fingers or fabric. Historians still argue whether colonial blacksmiths genuinely enjoyed fine detail work or just tolerated it, because wealthy customers paid better for items that looked nice, but you're firmly in the tolerating it for money camp. The bit, the business end with all the cuts and notches, is where things get truly finicky. You're filing tiny notches to match the broken key's profile, checking the depth and width of each cut against the original. Too shallow and the key won't push the wards aside, too deep and it'll jam. You're essentially creating a 3-dimensional puzzle piece that needs to interact perfectly with the internal mechanism, and you're doing Hit by hand with files that cost half a week's wages and will need replacing in 6 months. Between key work, you're also hammering out a set of door knockers for Sarah Pritchard, who apparently decided her front door wasn't welcoming enough without a decorative iron element for visitors to bang. Door knockers range from simple L-shaped pieces to elaborate decorative affairs with faces, animals, or geometric patterns. Sarah wants something elegant but not ostentatious, which translates to expensive, but she doesn't want to admit it should be expensive. You're creating a simple ring and plate design, a circular ring suspended from a round back plate that'll be mounted to her door. The ring needs to hang freely, but not too loosely, which means precise work on the pivot point. You're forming the ring around your anvil's horn, heating and hammering the iron into a perfect circle, then welding the ends together with the kind of invisible seam that makes it look like the ring was always one continuous piece. The back plate gets decorative attention. You're using a doming punch to create a subtle raised edge, then carefully planning and creating the mounting holes. This needs to be symmetrical or it'll look wrong every single time someone approaches the door. You're measuring with dividers, marking with a scribe, and punching the holes with precision that would impress your customers if they had any idea how easy it is to mess this up. Samuel is watching the lock work with genuine fascination, which is encouraging. "How do you know where to cut the key?" he asks, which is actually a smart question. "Practice," you tell him, which is true but unhelpful. Also, understanding how the wards inside the lock need to move. Each cut lets the key bypass a specific obstruction. Get them all right, and the lock turns. Get one wrong and you've made an expensive piece of decorative metal that doesn't open anything. You let him try filing one of the notches under close supervision, guiding his hand to maintain the correct angle. He's got decent hand control when he concentrates, and the notch comes out reasonably well. This is how apprenticeships work, little moments of supervised practice that gradually build competence over years. By the time Samuel's 20, he might actually be good at this. The key is taking shape. You've got the bow formed and pierced, the shank properly shouldered, and the bit cuts roughed in. Now it's the tedious process of test fitting, adjusting, filing, testing again, and repeating until the lock turns smoothly. You make 3 trips to Dr. Morrison's house. It's only 2 streets over, but still, testing the key in the actual lock, feeling where it binds, coming back to adjust. On the 3rd trip, the key slides in, turns smoothly, and the lock clicks open with that satisfying sound of mechanical success. Dr. Morrison pays you on the spot, actual coins, no barter, and you head back to your shop with the warm glow of a job well done and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll be doing something completely different that requires entirely different skills. The delicate work, the precision pieces, the locks and keys and decorative elements, these are the jobs that break up the monotony of horseshoes and hinges. They're also the work that pays best because not every blacksmith can do them well, and customers know it. You're not just a man with a hammer and some hot metal. You're a craftsman who can work at multiple scales, from massive church hinges to tiny key wards, all with the same forge and determination. The sun is lower now, painting your shop in orange light. Your back aches from hunching over fine work, but the key works, the door knocker is nearly done, and you've survived another afternoon. The anvil can rest for a moment. Your hands tell a story, though it's not a particularly cheerful one. They're mapped with scars from 27 years of working with objects that are either sharp, hot, or enthusiastically both. That thick white line across your left palm is from when you were 19, and grabbed a piece of stock you thought had cooled but decidedly had not. The puckered circle on your right thumb is from a spark that landed and burned through skin before you could brush it away. You could smell your own flesh cooking, which is a memory that never quite leaves you. The collection of small dots across your knuckles are from the hundreds of times scale has flown off hot iron, like tiny incendiary insects with personal vendettas. You can't feel much in your fingertips anymore, at least not the fine sensation that lets you detect texture or temperature accurately. The nerve endings have been burned, compressed, and traumatized so many times that they've basically given up on detailed reporting. You can tell hot from not hot in broad strokes, but the subtle gradations are gone. This is actually dangerous because you occasionally touch things that are hotter than you realize, discover this fact seconds later than you should, and acquire fresh burns to add to the collection. Your right shoulder, the hammer shoulder, has that constant ache that you've stopped thinking of as pain and started thinking of as just how shoulders feel. It's worse in the morning, worse in cold weather, and occasionally decides to completely lock up for no reason beyond spite. You've dislocated it twice, once from an awkward overhead hammer strike and once from catching yourself during a fall. It's never quite recovered from either incident, and historians still argue whether medieval and colonial blacksmiths developed specific shoulder pathologies, or if they just called it getting old and dealt with it. But you're living proof that repetitive overhead hammering destroys joints. Your back is its own catalogue of regret. Years of bending over the anvil, lifting heavy stock and working in positions that would make an ergonomics expert weep have compressed your spine into something that feels less like a structural support system and more like a stack of angry rocks held together by sheer stubbornness. You're 42 years old. Your spine is approximately 67. The math doesn't add up, but neither does anything else about this profession's effect on the human body. Standing up straight after hunching over detailed work triggers a symphony of pops, cracks, and grinding sounds that would concern you if you had time to be concerned. You don't. The alternative to working in pain is not working at all, and not working means not eating. So you've developed the colonial tradesman's approach to chronic pain. Acknowledge it, resent it, and keep working anyway. Your hearing is going, slowly but inevitably. The constant ting-ting-ting of hammer on anvil, multiplied by thousands of strikes per day, multiplied by nearly 3 decades, has done cumulative damage that nobody in 1750s America has the medical framework to properly understand. You've noticed you have to ask people to repeat themselves more often. Your wife's voice from across the room is sometimes just pleasant noise without distinct words. The birds that used to wake you sound fainter each year. In your right ear, the one that's always closest to the anvil when you're hammering, there's a constant ringing that never completely stops. Like someone far away is perpetually striking a bell you can't quite locate. Nobody talks about this. Blacksmiths don't gather in support groups to discuss their matching chronic injuries and hearing loss. You just accept that by the time you're 40, your body is partially broken, and by the time you're 60, if you make it to 60, you'll be significantly more broken. The older blacksmiths in the area move like much older men, bent and stiff, their hands gnarled and their hearing so poor they often just nod and pretend to understand what you've said. Old Thomas Green, who ran the forge before he died last year at 53, was basically deaf in his final years. You'd have to shout directly at his face to have any conversation, and even then, he mostly read your lips and guessed at context. His hands were so scarred and damaged that he'd lost 2 fingers to various accidents and infections, and the remaining digits barely bent anymore. He worked until a week before he died because retirement wasn't really an option for tradesmen without family wealth or savings. The forge was his life, and then his death. He caught pneumonia after working in winter conditions that would have killed a younger man's enthusiasm, but which he just accepted as normal. Your knees are another adventure in accumulated damage. Kneeling to shoe horses and oxen, squatting to work on lower pieces, standing on hard floors for 14 hours a day, they've all contributed to joints that sound like gravel in a bag when you climb stairs. Some mornings you debate whether getting out of bed is worth the knee pain, but then you remember bills and children and the fact that nobody else is going to fire up your forge, so up you go, joints crackling their complaints to an audience of 1. The burns continue happening. You got one just this morning, a small one, barely worth mentioning, when a spark landed on your forearm and you swatted it away half a second too late. It'll blister by tonight, hurt for a few days, heal into another small scar and join the tapestry of previous injuries. Some blacksmiths claim you develop immunity to heat after enough years, which is absolutely false but makes for good tavern conversation. Your pain receptors work just fine. You've just learned to react without thinking, and to keep working through minor burns because stopping for every small injury would mean never completing anything. Samuel watches you sometimes with an expression that might be concern or might just be teenage fascination with mortality. You've noticed him studying your scarred hands, your limping gait after a long day, the way you favour your right side when lifting heavy stock. He's probably thinking about whether this career path is really what he wants, or maybe he's just thinking about dinner. Teenagers are hard to read. Margaret worries, though she's stopped mentioning it because worrying achieves nothing and you're not going to stop working anyway. She rubs your shoulders sometimes in the evening, working her thumbs into the knots that have become permanent landscape features. It helps for about an hour. Then the knots return, probably bringing friends, and by morning you're back to baseline pain levels. The complete lack of medical understanding about occupational health means you're essentially experimenting on yourself with no control group and no way to compare outcomes. Some blacksmiths live to 70, some die at 40, some maintain reasonable health, some are crippled before they're 50. There's no pattern that you can see, no secret to avoiding the damage. You either survive the work or you don't, and finding out which category you're in requires the unhelpful strategy of waiting to see if you die. You stretch your back and something pops satisfyingly. Your hands flex, stiff and achy. Your shoulder protests movement, but the forge is warm, the anvil is waiting, and work doesn't stop just because your body is slowly filing complaints with management. You're the management, and you're ignoring the complaints. Another hammer strike, another day of accumulating microscopic damage. The scars are a resume written on skin, and you're still adding lines. The nearest legitimate blacksmith competition is Jacob Willis, 12 miles south in a settlement that's barely large enough to call itself a village. Jacob's a competent smith. You've met him at the occasional market day, and those 12 miles might as well be 100 for most of your customers. Travelling that distance for routine work makes no economic sense when you're right here. But you still think about Jacob sometimes. Specifically, you think about whether he's thinking about you, whether he's considering expanding north, whether he's offering better prices or faster turnaround times that might convince your customers that a day's round trip is worth the savings. This is the anxiety that nobody mentions when they romanticize the skilled tradesman's life. You're in constant, low-grade fear that someone will undercut your business. Colonial America doesn't have many blacksmiths per capita, because the training takes 7 years and the startup costs are prohibitive. But that scarcity that protects you also means every potential competitor is a genuine threat to your livelihood. You can't just shift to serving different customers. These are your only customers, and if they go elsewhere, you're looking at poverty with startling rapidity. Then there's the travelling smith situation. 3 times a year, sometimes 4, a travelling blacksmith rolls through the area with a portable forge setup on a wagon, offering to do basic repairs and simple forging jobs at prices that make you want to commit violence. These travelling smiths don't have your overhead, no shop to maintain, no property taxes, no family to support in a fixed location, so they can undercut your prices and still make a profit. They're not staying, just passing through, which means they can afford to burn bridges and relationships in ways you absolutely cannot. Last month, one of these travelling operations set up in the town common for 3 days and did a brisk business in pot repairs and knife sharpening. You watched customers you've served for years walk past your shop to save a few pennies with someone whose name they didn't know and whose work they couldn't verify. The travelling smith did acceptable work. You checked, because of course you checked. But acceptable isn't the same as good, and you're left hoping that when his repairs fail in 6 months, those customers remember that you warned them and come back properly ashamed. But the real nightmare scenario isn't Jacob Willis or the travelling smiths. It's young Robert Fletcher, no relation to your apprentice Samuel, who's been watching you work with the intensity of someone planning a hostile takeover. Robert is a farmer's son, 22 years old, strong as an ox, and apparently convinced that blacksmithing looks easy enough to teach himself. He's been buying used tools, built himself a crude forge behind his father's barn, and has been attempting to forge simple items like nails and hooks. His work is currently terrible. You've seen some of his early attempts, brittle nails that snap when driven, hooks with weak welds that'll fail under load, horseshoes that fit like someone forged them while blindfolded and concussed. But here's the thing, he's improving. Not quickly, and not with any formal instruction, but trial and error as a teacher that eventually gets results if the student is stubborn enough. Historians still argue whether informal blacksmith training outside the apprenticeship system was common or rare in colonial America, but you're watching it happen in real time and it's making you nervous. Robert charges almost nothing for his work, because he doesn't know what his labour is worth, and because he's desperate to build a customer base. He's not trying to make a living yet. His father's farm provides food and shelter, so he can afford to work for pocket change and experience. This is the worst kind of competition, someone who doesn't need to make money but is learning how while you're trying to feed a family on this trade. You've considered various responses to the Robert situation. You could ignore him and hope his interest fades, or his lack of proper training prevents him from ever becoming genuinely skilled. You could try to warn customers away from his work, but that makes you look petty and defensive. You could, and this is the option that keeps occurring to you, offer to take him on as a second apprentice, bringing him under your instruction and thereby controlling when and how he enters the market as a competitor. That last option has problems, though. You'd be training your own competition for free, essentially. Yes, he'd be bound by apprenticeship contract for 7 years, and yes, you'd gain another set of hands for shop work, but eventually he'd be a qualified blacksmith setting up his own operation, probably right here in the same community. The apprenticeship system is designed to limit competition by controlling the number of trained craftsmen, but it's not a perfect solution when someone's determined to learn regardless. Your pricing strategy is a constant calculation. Charge too much and customers go to travelling smiths, or start making do with broken tools. Charge too little, and you can't cover costs or save anything for emergencies. You watch Jacob Willis's prices when you hear about them through the merchant gossip network. You factor in what travelling smiths charge. You try to find the sweet spot where customers grumble about the cost, but pay anyway, because your quality and reliability are worth the premium. The reality is your monopoly is fragile. It's protected by distance, specialization, and the fact that forges don't just spring up overnight, but those protections aren't absolute. A bad harvest year where customers can't afford your services, a travelling smith who decides to settle down permanently, or Robert Fletcher accidentally making something that doesn't immediately fall apart. Any of these could shift the economic landscape in ways that hurt you badly. You've built your reputation on reliability, quality, and the fact that you've been here for 27 years. People know you. They know your work. They know that when you promise to have something ready by Tuesday, it'll be ready by Tuesday, and it'll work the way it's supposed to. That reputation is your most valuable asset, and it's also completely intangible and impossible to protect if someone starts offering good enough work for half your prices. Competition in Colonial America isn't the aggressive, advertise-heavy capitalism that'll develop later. It's quiet, personal, and operates through word of mouth and community relationships. But it's still real, still threatening, and still capable of destroying your livelihood if you're not careful. You lie awake some nights wondering if you should lower your prices preemptively, whether you should expand your services, whether you should work longer hours to build up savings against the day when competition arrives in earnest. The forge burns, the anvil waits, and somewhere 12 miles south, Jacob Willis is probably having similar anxious thoughts about you. The seasons dictate your work rhythm with the subtlety of a hammer to the face. Right now, in the thick of July, you're drowning in agricultural repairs because every farmer in the county is actively working their fields and breaking equipment at impressive rates. Plough blades hit rocks and crack, scythe blades dull from constant use during haying season. Wagon wheels lose their iron tyres from the strain of hauling heavy harvest loads over rough roads. Summer is relentless agricultural panic translated into metalwork emergencies, and you're the only person who can solve them. But summer blacksmithing has its own special torments beyond just volume. The heat is the obvious one. Working next to a forge when it's already 90 degrees outside means your shop becomes what you imagine the seventh circle of hell feels like, if hell specialized in humidity and sweat-based suffering. You drink water constantly, take breaks you can't afford, and still end each day looking like someone dunked you in a river and then rolled you in coal dust. Samuel goes through similar suffering, except he's 13 and hasn't quite figured out that drinking water before you're desperately thirsty is a better strategy than waiting until you're seeing spots. Winter is the opposite problem. Come January, you'll be standing as close to the forge as physically possible, while your breath makes clouds and your fingers go numb the instant you're not actively holding hot metal. Shoeing horses in winter is its own fresh nightmare. You're kneeling on frozen ground that feels like kneeling on malicious ice, working with animals whose hooves are cold and stiff, trying to drive nails when your hands are so cold you can barely feel the hammer. The metal cools faster in winter air, which means more trips back to the forge, more charcoal burned, more time per job while earning the same amount. But winter also brings different work. You spend more time on indoor projects, hinges, locks, decorative ironwork for people's homes, because farmers aren't breaking field equipment when the fields are frozen solid. You get a lot of fireplace tool work, pot repairs, and weapon maintenance from militia members who suddenly remember that spring drilling season is coming and their musket hasn't been cleaned since last year. It's steadier, more predictable work than summer's chaos, though you'd trade steady income for working conditions that don't make your joints ache so badly you can barely sleep. Spring is weapon sharpening season, and it's gotten worse in recent years. The French and Indian tensions up north, Historians still argue whether the average colonial blacksmith genuinely understood the geopolitical implications of European power struggles in North America, or just noticed an uptick in weapon repair requests. But you're firmly in the latter camp, mean that every farmer who's also militia is suddenly very interested in whether their musket lock still functions and their bayonet is properly sharpened. You spend March and April doing more weapon work than the rest of the year combined. Bayonets need sharpening, which is straightforward grinding work that's tedious but pays well. Musket locks need repair, cleaning, and occasionally complete reconstruction when someone's grandfather's musket from some previous war has finally given up the ghost. You replace springs, repair frisons, that's the piece that the flint strikes to create sparks, and generally resurrect firearms that should probably be retired but won't be, because new muskets cost a year's income and people make do with what they have. The militia captain visits every spring with lists. Lists of muskets needing work, lists of edged weapons needing attention, lists of requests from men who've noticed their military equipment is held together more by hope than by functional mechanics. You work through these lists knowing that some of this equipment might actually be used in combat, which adds a layer of responsibility that horseshoe work simply doesn't carry. A poorly fitted horseshoe means an annoyed customer. A badly repaired musket lock means someone doesn't come home from wherever the fighting happens. Fall is transitional. The harvest creates one last surge of agricultural repairs, scythes for reaping, wagons for hauling, all the equipment that's been limping along through summer and finally breaks completely in September. But you're also starting to get winter preparation work. People need snow shovels repaired, tools for ice breaking, and all the domestic ironwork that they've been putting off all year. Fall is when you try to work ahead, forging extra horseshoes and common hinges during slower days, so you'll have stock ready when winter hits, and every job takes twice as long. The seasonal cycle also affects your material supply. Winter makes charcoal more expensive because colliers have a harder time managing their burn piles in wet, cold conditions. Spring flooding can disrupt iron shipments if the roads turn to impassable mud. Summer heat means pig iron arrives, sometimes already starting to rust from humidity exposure during transport. Fall is usually the best time for material purchases. Roads are dry, demand is moderate, and suppliers are trying to move stock before winter makes delivery unreliable. Your body responds to seasons too in ways you're not thrilled about. Winter makes every joint hurt worse because cold and arthritis are apparently best friends. Summer heat exhausts you faster, but at least keeps muscles loose. Spring and fall are the mercy seasons when you can work without either freezing or melting, though you've learned not to take those comfortable weeks for granted because they pass quickly. The customer base shifts with seasons too. Wealthy customers like Henry Ashford are more likely to commission decorative work in fall and winter when they're not focused on agricultural concerns. Farmers dominate your summer schedule. Housewives bring domestic item repairs in spring when they're doing their annual cleaning and notice all the broken things they've been working around. The militia creates its own spring surge. You've learned to anticipate these patterns, to stock materials and plan your time around the predictable waves of seasonal demand. Some years are different. A particularly harsh winter means more frozen and cracked ironwork to repair in spring. A drought summer means fewer agricultural repairs because crops fail and farmers aren't working fields as intensely. A mild fall means people delay winter preparation work and then panic in November when snow arrives early. You can't control weather, but you've learned to read its effects on your business and adjust accordingly. The weather doesn't care about your preferences, your pain levels, or your profit margins. It just cycles through its seasons and you cycle through your responses, adapting your work to match the demands that each season brings. The anvil sees different projects as the year turns, but it never stops singing. The hardest part of blacksmithing isn't the physical labor or the heat, or even the constant risk of injury, it's the money. Or more accurately, the lack of money, the confusion about money, and the elaborate dance of credit, barter, and increasingly desperate arithmetic that determines whether you can afford next month's iron shipment or have to tell Jacob Martin that you'll pay him when you can and hope he doesn't cut off your supply. Colonial American currency is a beautiful disaster. You're theoretically dealing in British pound sterling, but actual British coins are rare enough that you might see a genuine pound coin 3 times a year if you're lucky. More commonly, you're handling Spanish dollars, pieces of 8 that get literally cut into pieces to make change, hence 2 bits for $0.25. Then there's colonial scrip, which is paper money issued by the colony that fluctuates in value based on political decisions happening in Philadelphia or Boston that you don't understand and can't control. Some days a colonial pound is worth about 7 shillings sterling. Other days it's worth 5. The exchange rate shifts based on factors that might as well be sorcery for all the control you have over them. Most of your customers don't have cash anyway. Thomas Miller pays you in a combination of coins, milling services, and occasional grain deliveries. William Porter has a running tab that's currently at £2, 3 shillings, and he'll pay some of it in actual money when he can, some in produce, and the rest whenever he gets around to it. Martha Webb just paid you in a chicken, remember? That chicken is now worth approximately 1 pot repair in your mental accounting system, which is how you're keeping track of a barter economy that would make an economist weep. You keep a ledger, a thick book with increasingly desperate entries tracking who owes you what. Some entries are straightforward. John Davies, ox shoeing, 1 shilling 6pence, paid. Others read like cryptic prophecies. Robert Hayes, tyre hoops, 10 shillings. Partially paid 3 shillings, promised remainder by harvest. Also owes from last month, see page 47. You cross-reference entries, carry balances forward, and occasionally spend an evening just staring at the numbers trying to figure out if you're solvent or slowly drowning in unpaid receivables. The running tabs are necessary because that's how colonial commerce works, but they're also terrifying. You've got probably 20 customers with outstanding balances right now, totaling somewhere around £15 if you're being optimistic about collection. That's nearly 2 months of income, in theory. In practice, you'll collect maybe 3/4 of it, and it'll trickle in over the next 6 months in combinations of cash, goods, services, and promises of future payment. Meanwhile, your own creditors want their money on actual schedules. Jacob Martin wants payment for iron within the month. Thomas Wickham expects payment for charcoal every 2 weeks. The landlord, you don't own this property, just rent it, wants his rent on the first of each month with remarkable consistency. This creates a cash flow problem that occupies approximately 30% of your mental energy at all times. You're constantly calculating, if the Fletcher account pays this week and the church settles its balance for the hinges and you can collect on at least 3 of the small accounts, you'll have enough to pay for next month's iron shipment and the charcoal bill and still have something left for food. If any of those payments don't materialize, you're looking at some combination of delaying iron purchases, extending credit with your own suppliers, or feeding your family on increasingly creative definitions of adequate nutrition. The wealthy customers like Henry Ashford pay promptly in actual cash, which is why you prioritize their work, despite privately thinking their requests for decorative fireplace tools are frivolous. Cash is king in a barter economy. It's fungible, it's accepted everywhere, and it doesn't need to be fed or stored or used before it spoils. A pound coin doesn't lose value if you hold it for a month. A chicken does, in the sense that it eats your grain and might die of mysterious chicken ailments before you can convert it into something else. But you can't refuse barter payment from your poorer customers because then they'd have no way to obtain your services and you'd lose half your customer base. So you accept chickens, grain, firewood, cloth, vegetables, labour exchanges, basically anything that has value in the colonial economy. This means you're running a bizarre secondary business as an informal commodities trader. You took 3 bushels of apples from Sarah Morton last week for a gate latch repair. You don't need 3 bushels of apples, but you traded 1 bushel to the baker for bread and another to Thomas for a discount on milling fees, and you still have 1 bushel that Margaret is making into preserves before they rot. The really tricky customers are the ones who promise to pay when the harvest comes in, or when my ship arrives, or when my lawsuit settles. These are IOUs backed by hope and optimism rather than actual assets you can see. Sometimes they pay, sometimes the harvest fails, the ship sinks, or the lawsuit goes the other way, and you're left with an unpaid bill and the awkward social situation of trying to collect from someone who genuinely has nothing to give you. Historians still argue whether colonial tradesmen maintained strict collection practices or just wrote off bad debts as the cost of community membership, but you're living in the uncomfortable middle ground where you need the money, but also need to maintain relationships with people you see every Sunday at church. You've learned to be strategic about credit. New customers pay cash up front until they prove reliable. Established customers get reasonable credit terms. Wealthy customers get excellent terms because they always pay eventually. Customers with a history of not paying get told you'll start their work once you see payment, which makes you feel like a mercenary, but also like someone who might feed his children next month. The tax situation adds another layer of chaos. The colonial government wants its share, which is calculated based on your property value and your estimated income, both of which are somewhat fictional numbers you negotiate with the tax assessor who may or may not understand how blacksmith economics work. You pay in a combination of cash and sometimes labour. Last year you made hinges for the courthouse at a discounted rate that was really a disguised tax payment. Tonight you'll probably spend an hour updating your ledger, calculating balances, and trying to figure out if you can afford to order iron next month, or if you need to stretch your current stock and hope nothing major breaks. The numbers will give you a headache. Margaret will ask if you're coming to bed. You'll say soon, and mean eventually. And tomorrow you'll wake up and hammer metal while trying not to think about whether the Fletcher account will actually pay this time. The money dance never stops. You're constantly spinning, trying to stay balanced and hoping you don't fall. Around what you estimate is 6 or 7 in the evening, the sun is getting low but hasn't set yet. You finally reach the point where starting new work would be stupid. Your body has been campaigning for this moment since about 3 o'clock, but your brain and your economic anxiety have been staging a very effective filibuster. Now though, even you have to admit that you're done. Not because all the work is finished. There's always more work. But because continuing would mean operating heavy hammers and hot metal while exhausted. And that's how you end up with injuries that are both painful and expensive. "Samuel, we're banking the forge," you announce. And he looks up from whatever he's been doing. Probably filing something. Or possibly just staring into space while contemplating the existential weight of being 13. Banking the forge is one of those rituals that marks the transition from working to done working, and it requires actual attention, because a forge left wrong can either die completely or burn all night wasting charcoal you can't afford to waste. The process starts with stopping the air supply. No more bellows pumping means no more forced oxygen feeding the fire. The coals settle into a gentler burn, the flames dying back to a steady glow rather than the active inferno you've been working with all day. You're looking for a specific state, hot enough that tomorrow morning you can revive it quickly, but not so hot that it'll consume itself overnight. You use a poker, a long iron rod specifically for forge management, to spread the coals out somewhat, breaking up the dense core where heat concentrates. This helps everything cool more evenly and prevents hot spots that might flare up unexpectedly. Then you're carefully adding fresh charcoal over the top, creating a blanket layer that'll hold heat while starving the fire of oxygen. It's counterintuitive, adding fuel to bank a fire, but the physics work out. The new charcoal doesn't catch because there's insufficient air, but it insulates the existing coals, keeping them alive in a kind of suspended animation. Samuel watches this process with the focus he usually reserves for meals and avoiding work. He's learning, though. You can tell because he's not asking questions, just observing. Banking a forge properly is one of those skills that's 90% feel and 10% hoping you got it right. Too much charcoal and you smother it. Too little and it dies. Tomorrow morning you'll know if you succeeded by whether the forge revives easily or requires the full morning ritual of starting from scratch. With the forge settling into its banked state, you turn to tool management. Your anvil area looks like a metalworking explosion happened and nobody bothered to clean up, which is accurate except the explosion lasted 14 hours and you were responsible for all of it. Hammers are scattered across the work surface. Tongs are piled in heaps that would give an organization expert heart palpitations. Punches, chisels, and files are distributed according to whatever chaos theory governed their use throughout the day. You start returning everything to its proper place. Each hammer goes on its designated wall hook, crosspieces with crosspieces, ball peens together, the sledge on its heavy-duty hook that you reinforced last year after the previous one failed spectacularly and put a hammer-sized hole in the floor. The organization isn't about aesthetics, it's about efficiency and safety. Tomorrow morning, when you need a specific hammer, you need to grab it without thinking, not spend 5 minutes searching through piles while your iron cools in the forge. Tongs get sorted by type and size, hung on their rack where the jaw shapes are visible at a glance. This is meditation, really. The repetitive motion of picking up a tool, identifying it, placing it in its home. Your hands know these tools better than you know most people's names. That pair of flat-jaw tongs with a slightly bent handle is your favourite for sheet work. The wolf-jaw tongs with the newer rivets are what you use for square stock. Each one has a history, a purpose, a place. The smaller tools, punches, chisels, drift pins, go into their boxes and compartments on your workbench. Some blacksmiths just throw these into buckets and sort them out as needed, but you learned early that spending 5 minutes organising now saves 20 minutes of frustrated searching later. Plus, it's harder to lose expensive tools when they have designated homes rather than living in what you've come to think of as the bucket of chaos and regret. Sweeping is next, and it's more involved than you'd think. The floor is covered in scale, those small bits of iron oxide that flake off hot metal during forging. There are also metal shavings from filing, chunks of slag from welding, bits of broken charcoal, and probably some things you'd rather not identify. You sweep it all toward the collection area near the door, and Samuel helps by holding the dustpan while you sweep piles into it. The scale gets saved in a barrel because waste not, want not. Eventually you'll sell it to someone who needs it, for some purpose you don't fully understand but who's willing to pay for iron oxide by the pound. The metal shavings go in a separate container. Those will get melted down and reused when you've accumulated enough. Nothing is truly waste in a blacksmith shop. Everything metal either gets reused, repurposed, or sold to someone else who'll find a use for it. The water troughs need attention too. The main quenching trough is disgusting. Black water full of scale, char, and probably small amounts of several different metals from the various projects you've quenched today. You'll need to empty and refill it soon, but not tonight. Tonight you're just checking the water level and making sure nothing's floating in it that shouldn't be. The drinking water barrel gets checked too. Important too. Keep this separate from the quenching water unless you enjoy the taste of industrial processes. Tools that need immediate repair or sharpening get set aside in a specific spot. You've got 2 files that are too worn to be useful, a hammer handle that's starting to crack, and a pair of tongs with a rivet that's working loose. These become tomorrow's first tasks, or, more realistically, next week's tasks when you have a slow moment. The maintenance never ends. Tools maintain you while you maintain tools in a cycle that would be poetic if it weren't so exhausting. The workbench gets a wipe down, clearing away the day's accumulation of soot, scale, and that general grime that appears whenever metal and fire interact with wooden surfaces. You're not achieving cleanliness here. That ship sailed approximately 27 years ago. You're achieving functional for tomorrow. The difference is subtle but important. Finally, you do a safety check. No hot metal sitting where someone might accidentally touch it. No tools positioned to fall. No fire hazards that might turn your shop into an insurance disaster that doesn't exist yet because insurance companies haven't quite figured out how to handle blacksmith shops. The forge is banked properly, glowing gently but not dangerously. The door can be secured without worrying that something inside is actively trying to burn the building down. This cleanup ritual takes about 30 minutes, and it's probably the most peaceful part of your day. No one's demanding immediate service. No metal is fighting you. No customers are waiting. It's just you, your tools, your space, and the quiet satisfaction of putting things in order after a day of controlled chaos. Your shoulders still ache, your back still hurts, your hands are still scarred and stiff, but the shop is ready for tomorrow, and that's something. Samuel finishes sweeping the last corner, and you nod approval. He's getting better at this too. The cleanup used to take twice as long with him helping. Now he actually helps, understanding what needs doing without constant direction. Small victories. The shop is as clean as it's going to get. The forge breathes softly in its banked state. Tomorrow it starts again. You climb the stairs to your living quarters with legs that feel like someone replaced your bones with lead weights, and you're immediately greeted by chaos that somehow feels comforting after 14 hours of metalwork. Little William has discovered the butter churn and is attempting to operate it with the kind of enthusiastic incompetence that only a 3-year-old can muster. Sarah is building something with wooden blocks that she's arranged on the floor in what appears to be a carefully planned trap for anyone trying to walk through the room. Margaret is at the hearth stirring something in the large pot, the one you repaired 2 weeks ago, you notice with mild satisfaction. And the whole scene would be domestic bliss if everything weren't, covered in that persistent layer of soot. This is family life as a blacksmith. Your children grow up in an environment that's part home, part industrial accident waiting to happen. The smell of the forge permeates everything. Your daughter's clothes, freshly washed this morning, already have grey smudges by evening. The walls that Margaret scrubbed last week show new deposits of fine black powder that drifted up through the floorboards, because your shop and your home share air in ways that no amount of barrier building can fully prevent. You're essentially raising your children in a barely separated metalworking facility, and historians still argue whether this was considered normal or problematic in colonial trades. But you're living the answer. It's both, and nobody has better options. The workshop below is technically off-limits to the children, which is a rule that exists more in theory than practice. Sarah has been sneaking down there since she could walk, fascinated by the orange glow of the forge and the rhythmic hammering sounds. You've caught her 3 times this month alone, standing in the doorway watching you work with the kind of intense focus that makes you simultaneously proud and terrified. The shop contains approximately 47 different ways for a 5-year-old to injure themselves fatally, and you've tried to impress this upon her with varying levels of success. Metal is hot, you've told her roughly 600 times. Sharp things cut, heavy things fall, stay upstairs. She nods with solemn understanding, and then shows up at the forge the next day asking if she can pump the bellows. You've compromised by letting her sit on the stairs sometimes, watching from a safe distance, which at least means you know where she is rather than discovering her standing next to the quenching trough, investigating why the water looks so strange. Young William is still too young to be interested in the forge, but he's discovered that metal shavings are shiny, and therefore obviously meant to be collected and possibly eaten. You've pulled bits of metal from his mouth twice, and Margaret has instituted a policy of checking his hands and face every time he comes upstairs from playing in the yard near the shop entrance. The yard itself is its own safety hazard. Scattered metal scraps, the occasional dropped tool, and areas where you've dumped scale and slag that create sharp-edged hazards for small feet. Margaret manages the household with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for military campaigns. She's fighting a losing battle against soot, accepting victories where she can find them, and pretending not to notice the rest. The furniture is functional, but permanently discoloured. The windows, when you remember to open them, let in fresh air but also allow more soot distribution to the neighbourhood, which means you're probably contributing to everyone else's homes being dirtier too. Community spirit through shared industrial. Pollution. The cooking happens in the same room where your family sleeps, sits, and attempts to maintain some semblance of normal life. The hearth serves multiple purposes: cooking, heating, and occasionally emergency metalworking when something needs fixing immediately and you can't be bothered to fire up the main forge. You've heated small pieces at the cooking fire before, hammered them on the hearthstones, and quenched them in the cooking water. Margaret has opinions about this practice, which she shares with impressive frequency and volume. Your children's play reflects their environment. Sarah has a set of nail heads, bent and unusable for actual construction, that she's claimed as toys. She arranges them in patterns, builds little structures with them, and occasionally tries to hammer them into things with a small wooden mallet you made her after she attempted to use a real hammer and nearly removed her own toes. William's favourite toy is a piece of bent iron rod that used to be part of a pot handle. He waves it around, drags it on the floor, making scraping sounds, and occasionally drops it on his own foot and cries. This is apparently entertainment in Colonial America. The noise from below penetrates upward constantly. The ting-ting-ting of hammer on anvil is your family's soundtrack. Margaret claims she can sleep through it now, though you're not sure if that's adaptation or mild hearing damage affecting the whole household. The children definitely don't notice it anymore. They've never known a home that isn't accompanied by constant metalworking percussion. Sarah actually gets concerned when the shop is quiet, coming to check if you're sick or dead. Dinner is at the table you built from wood, but reinforced with iron brackets, because you're a blacksmith and apparently can't help yourself. The chairs have iron joints. The door has iron hinges you made on a slow Tuesday 3 years ago. Even the fireplace poker, which Margaret uses for cooking and you occasionally borrow for forge work, is a custom piece you forged to exact specifications that seemed important at the time and now you can't remember why. You eat dinner with hands that are never fully clean. The soot works into the cracks of your skin, settles under your nails, and becomes part of your dermatological identity. You've given up trying to present clean hands at meals. Margaret has given up commenting on it. The children don't know that hands can be any other colour. This is just how the family looks. Slightly grey, slightly sooty, slightly smelling of charcoal and metal and hard work. The evening routine involves Margaret managing the children's bedtime, while you sit at the table updating your ledger or just staring at the wall in that exhausted way where thinking becomes optional. Sometimes you help with bedtime, telling stories about famous blacksmiths or legendary swords, because apparently your idea of children's entertainment is metalworking propaganda. Sarah eats it. Sarah eats up. William falls asleep halfway through because he's 3, and story comprehension isn't his strength yet. Your bed, the one you'll collapse into in another hour or so, is in the same room where your children sleep. Privacy isn't really a concept in colonial working-class housing. Everyone shares space, everyone hears everyone else's nighttime sounds, and everyone just accepts this as normal because the alternative is building multiple rooms, which costs money you don't have. The family sleeps together in a space that's probably 15 feet square, and you've learned to navigate it in darkness without stepping on children or furniture. Margaret occasionally asks if you'll ever make enough money to buy a proper house, one that's separate from the forge, one that isn't perpetually covered in industrial byproducts, one where the children can play without you worrying they'll touch something that'll burn their hands off. You give her vague reassurances that translate to probably not, but I'd rather not say that explicitly. She knows. You both know. This is the life, home and work merged into one sooty, loud, constantly dangerous environment that you're all just trying to survive while occasionally experiencing moments of happiness between the metal shavings. Sarah climbs into your lap, leaving small sooty handprints on your already sooty shirt. This is family time as a colonial blacksmith. It smells like smoke, sounds like distant hammering that never quite stops echoing in your ears, and feels like love expressed through shared acceptance of terrible working conditions. There are things you know about metalworking that you'll never tell Samuel, at least not for several more years. Not because you're cruel or withholding, but because some knowledge is currency in the blacksmith economy, and giving away your competitive advantages too freely is how you end up training someone who undercuts your business the moment their apprenticeship ends. This tension, between teaching and protecting your trade secrets, is one of those ethical grey areas that nobody talks about but everyone navigates. Take tempering, for instance. Tempering is what you do after you've hardened steel to make it less brittle and more functional. Get it wrong and you've got a tool that either shatters on first use or stays so soft it won't hold an edge. Get it right, and you've got a chisel or axe blade that'll work for years. The technique involves heating hardened steel to very specific temperatures and then cooling it in carefully controlled ways. And the temperature control is where the art and mystery live. You judge tempering temperature by colour. Heat steel slowly, and it develops an oxide layer that progresses through a spectrum. Pale straw yellow, deeper yellow, brown, purple, blue, and eventually back to grey as it gets too hot. Each colour represents a specific temperature range, and each temperature range produces different material properties. Pale yellow gives you hard, brittle edges good for cutting tools. Purple gives you toughness for springs. Blue gives you flexibility for swords or items that need to bend without breaking. This colour reading system was taught to you by your father, who learned it from his father, and it's based on experience accumulated over centuries of metalworkers staring at hot steel and noting what happened when they stopped at different colours. There's no thermometer involved. Those exist, but they're expensive and impractical for forge work. You're reading the oxide layer progression with your eyes and making split-second decisions about when to quench, based on accumulated experience and hope that you read it correctly. Samuel knows the basic colours. You've taught him that much because he needs to understand that metal changes with heat. But you haven't taught him your specific techniques for achieving the exact yellows and purples you want. You haven't explained that you sometimes quench in warm oil versus cold water depending on the carbon content you suspect the steel has. You haven't shared that you've learned to judge steel quality by how quickly it forms scale when heating, or that you can predict tempering behaviour by watching how the colour spreads across the surface during reheating. These are your secrets, earned through 27 years of trial and error, successes and expensive failures. They're what make your tools better than what an inexperienced smith produces, and they're what customers pay for even if they don't know it. When someone brings you a broken axe and you repair it so well that it works better than when it was new, you're not just applying heat and hammering. You're applying proprietary knowledge about grain structure, carbon distribution, and heat treatment that you've accumulated through a career of careful observation. The welding techniques are another closely guarded category. Forge welding, joining two pieces of iron by heating them white hot and hammering them together, seems straightforward until you try it and discover that clean welds require skills that aren't obvious from watching. The flux you use matters. The temperature has to be precisely in the welding range. Too cool and the pieces won't bond. Too hot and you burn through the metal. The hammer technique matters. Wrong angle or wrong force and you make the problem worse instead of better. You've developed a specific flux mixture that works better than straight borax, combining it with sand and a few other ingredients in ratios you've adjusted over years. That mixture is your secret recipe, and you mix it in batches when Samuel isn't watching, because you're not ready to share that competitive advantage. Maybe when he's 20, and you trust he won't immediately set up shop next door using your techniques, you'll teach him. Maybe not. The apprenticeship contract binds him to you for 7 years, but knowledge shared is knowledge that can walk away. Your hardening technique for tool steel is particularly valuable. You've learned through painful experience that different iron stock, despite theoretically being the same material, hardens differently. Some pieces need to be quenched aggressively in cold water, others need a gentler brine quench. Some require oil quenching to prevent cracking. You've developed an intuitive sense for which pieces need which treatment, based on how they behave during heating, how the scale forms, how quickly they respond to the hammer when hot. This intuition isn't something you can easily teach because you don't fully understand it yourself. It's pattern recognition developed over thousands of heating cycles, and it manifests as a feeling that this piece needs oil or this one can handle water. When you're right, you produce superior tools. When you're wrong, you produce expensive scrap metal and have to start over while eating the material cost. The stakes are high enough that you guard these practices carefully and execute them when Samuel is conveniently busy elsewhere. The reputation consequences of metallurgical failure are severe in a small community. One batch of poorly tempered tools, chisels that shatter, axe blades that chip, knife edges that won't hold, and everyone knows about it by Sunday church. Your reputation is built on consistent quality, and that consistency comes from techniques you've refined through errors you'd rather forget, and successes you carefully noted and repeated. You still remember the batch of hinges you made 7 years ago that all failed within months because you rushed the work and didn't properly normalize the iron before forging. The iron had internal stresses from poor cooling during initial manufacture, and you should have heated and slow-cooled it to relieve those stresses before working it. You didn't, because you were behind schedule and arrogant about your skills. Every single hinge bent or broke, and you spent 3 months doing free repairs and eating the material costs, while your reputation took a beating that took years to fully recover from. That failure taught you more than 100 successes ever could, and the specific techniques you developed to avoid repeating it are now part of your guarded knowledge. You test iron stock for internal stresses in ways Samuel doesn't know about. You've learned to recognize the sound and feel of compromised metal. You've developed pre-forging treatments that ensure the material is actually ready for work, rather than just assuming it is. Historians still argue whether medieval and colonial blacksmiths genuinely understood metallurgy, or just developed superstitious practices that happened to work. But from your perspective, the distinction doesn't matter. You know that certain practices produce reliable results. You don't know why, in terms of grain structure or carbon diffusion, those concepts won't be fully understood for another century. But you know that if you heat steel to cherry red and quench it, it hardens. If you then carefully reheat it to straw yellow and quench again, it becomes less brittle while maintaining edge-holding ability. The why is irrelevant compared to the reproducible what. Some of your techniques probably don't actually work and are just confirmation bias dressed up as trade secrets. You've got a ritual for welding that involves tapping the anvil 3 times before starting, and you genuinely believe it improves weld quality, even though intellectually you know that's probably nonsense. But you're not taking chances. The ritual stays, the welds work, and you're not conducting controlled experiments to determine which parts are metallurgy and which parts are theatre. Samuel will learn some of this eventually. The apprenticeship system requires you to teach him the trade, and you take that obligation seriously. But there's teaching how to be a blacksmith, and there's teaching how to be as good as I am, and those are different conversations with different timelines. Right now, he's learning the basics. In 3 years, he'll learn intermediate techniques. In 5 or 6 years, when you're confident he's committed to the profession and not just serving time until something better comes along, maybe you'll start sharing the deeper secrets. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll keep some techniques entirely to yourself, taking them to your grave like old Thomas Green did with whatever special knowledge he'd accumulated. It's not cruelty. It's survival in a competitive environment where your skills are your only protection against poverty. The anvil knows your secrets, the metal remembers, and you keep both guarded. It's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture when you're elbow deep in someone's broken plough blade or hammering out your 40th horseshoe nail of the week. But every piece of metal you shape ripples outward into the community in ways that aren't immediately obvious when you're just trying to meet deadlines and pay for charcoal. Those nails you're forging, the ones that seem like tedious, repetitive work that numbs your mind and destroys your shoulder, are literally holding the village together. Every house, every barn, every structure within 10 miles probably contains nails you made, driven into wood by someone building their life in this colonial experiment. The construction economy depends entirely on your nail production. A modest house requires roughly 2,000 nails of various sizes. 2,000! That's weeks of work just in nail making, spread across multiple blacksmiths serving different areas, and without those nails the house doesn't get built. People would revert to wooden pegs and joinery, which works but takes significantly longer and requires more skilled carpentry. Your nails, those mundane little spikes of iron that you can forge almost automatically while thinking about other things, are the difference between houses going up in weeks versus months. The agricultural economy revolves around metal implements you create and maintain. Those plough blades you're constantly repairing and resharpening are what turn hard colonial soil into farmable land. Without ploughs, farmers are using hoes and manual labour, which means they're cultivating maybe 1/10 of the acreage they can manage with draft animals and proper ploughs. Less cultivation means less food production. Less food means the community can't grow, can't support additional settlers, can't expand into a proper town with the economic diversity that brings. Your horseshoes keep the transportation network functional. Horses and oxen moving goods between settlements need shoes, or their hooves break down and the animals become lame. A lame horse means a farmer can't get crops to market, a merchant can't transport goods, a messenger can't deliver important information about French troop movements, or colonial politics or whatever else needs communicating across distances. You're not just shoeing horses, you're maintaining the connective tissue that lets colonial society function above subsistence level. The militia work has taken on new significance lately, and you've noticed the shift even if you don't fully understand the geopolitical implications. The French have been expanding their presence in territories to the north and west, building forts, making alliances with native tribes, and generally making the British colonial government nervous. This translates down to your level as increased weapon maintenance requests, and occasional demands for new equipment that the colony can barely afford, but feels compelled to purchase anyway. Every musket lock you repair might matter, in a conflict that feels simultaneously inevitable and distant. The men who own these muskets are your neighbours, farmers and shopkeepers and fellow tradesmen who will be called up if fighting starts. Some of them will use the weapons you maintained, and you try not to think too hard about whether a lock failure could mean the difference between someone coming home or not. Historians still argue whether frontier blacksmiths in the 1750s felt genuine responsibility for military equipment quality or just treated it as another job, but you're feeling the weight of it more as the political situation deteriorates. The French and Indian War, though you don't know it'll be called that historically, because you're living in what feels like a tense pre-war situation rather than a named conflict, is brewing around you. The military preparations are abstract until they translate into concrete requests. Sharpen bayonets, repair firearms, forge additional edged weapons for militia members who currently have none. You're not a soldier, but you're supporting the military infrastructure that might keep your community from being overrun if conflicts escalate. Beyond defence, you're enabling economic activity that's slowly transforming this colonial frontier into something more permanent. The locks you make protect property and enable commerce. Merchants can secure goods, families can protect valuables, and the general sense of security that comes from lockable doors allows people to invest in improvements, rather than just subsistence. The hinges you forge let buildings have functional doors and windows that open and close reliably, which sounds trivial until you've lived in a structure where the door doesn't hang properly and lets in weather and wildlife. Your decorative ironwork, the pieces that wealthy customers commission, serves a different function in the community ecosystem. Those ornamental fireplace tools and door knockers and fence finials are status symbols certainly, but they're also statements that this colonial settlement is becoming civilized, developing a class of people with disposable income who want their homes to reflect aesthetic choices beyond pure function. That cultural development signals to potential settlers that this isn't just a hard-scrabble frontier outpost, it's becoming a real town with social stratification and economic opportunities. The water infrastructure depends on iron components you make. Pumps need metal parts, wells need iron fittings, and the communal systems that let settlements grow beyond tiny populations require metalwork you provide. Same with sanitation, such as it exists. Chamber pots need metal handles, waste management systems need iron components, and the slow march toward less disease-ridden living conditions is partially built on mundane metal pieces you hammer out between more glamorous projects. Even the church, the social and spiritual centre of colonial community life, depends on your work. Those hinges you're making for the new door aren't just hardware. They're part of the infrastructure that allows the congregation to have a proper worship space. The bell mountings, the decorative metalwork, the structural iron that reinforces the building, all of it emerges from forges like yours, shaped by blacksmiths who are simultaneously tradesmen and inadvertent community architects. Your apprentice training with Samuel represents another form of community investment. You're creating the next generation of skilled tradesmen who will maintain and expand the metalworking capacity this growing settlement needs. Without apprenticeships producing trained blacksmiths, the community would face a skills crisis within a generation as older smiths died or retired without replacements. The knowledge transfer happening in your shop, frustrating as it sometimes is when Samuel bleeds on the floor or nearly drops an anvil on his foot, is how colonial society maintains its technical capabilities across generations. The economic multiplier effects of your work extend further than you probably realize. The tools you make let carpenters work more efficiently, which lets them build more structures, which attracts more settlers, which creates demand for more tools. The agricultural implements increase farm productivity, which creates surplus that can be traded, which attracts merchants, which creates a more diverse economy that needs more specialized tools. You're not just filling individual orders, you're enabling economic complexity that transforms frontier settlements into viable towns and eventually cities. Some nights you lie in bed, the bed with the iron frame reinforcements you made because of course you did, and think about this bigger picture. Your daily work is grinding, repetitive, occasionally dangerous, and often painful. But it's also foundational to everything happening around you. Houses rising, farms producing, militia preparing, economy developing, all of it requires metal shaped by someone with your skills. You're not powerful in the political sense, not wealthy, not famous beyond your immediate community, but you're essential in a way that makes you simultaneously proud and exhausted. The nails hold houses together, the ploughs feed families, the musket repairs might save lives, and tomorrow you'll wake up and hammer more metal, continuing to build the infrastructure of colonial American life one piece at a time, whether you're thinking about the bigger picture or just trying to meet your charcoal budget. The work continues because it has to, because everyone needs what you make, because this is your role in the enormous interconnected machinery of a society that's slowly building itself in a new world. The anvil has witnessed thousands of these small pieces that become large impacts, and it'll witness thousands more before you're done. The evening is settling into proper darkness now, that thick summer night darkness where the heat persists, even after the sun gives up. You're sitting at your table with the ledger open in front of you, updating entries by candlelight because you're too cheap or too practical, probably both, to burn more than one candle for bookkeeping. The numbers swim slightly in the flickering light, and you're calculating whether you can actually afford next month's iron shipment, or if you need to stretch your current stock and hope nobody needs anything major forged from scratch. Margaret has gotten the children to bed, which is its own minor miracle involving stories, water requests, bathroom trips, and the kind of patient negotiation that would impress a diplomat. The room is quieter now, just the sound of your quill scratching entries into the ledger, and the distant settling sounds of the building cooling from the day's accumulated heat. Your forge below is banked, breathing quietly in its overnight state, waiting for tomorrow's revival. You're exhausted in that deep bone-level way that comes from 14 hours of physical labour and heat that would make sensible people quit. Your shoulders ache with the familiar throb that's become your constant companion. Your hands are stiff, the scars pulling tight across knuckles and palms that have absorbed decades of minor trauma. Your back is making its usual complaints about your life choices, and your hearing is still slightly muffled from the day's constant hammer-on-anvil percussion. This is normal. This is what evenings feel like when you're a blacksmith in Colonial America, and tomorrow will bring the exact same collection of pains, slightly rearranged for variety. But you did good work today. Thomas Miller's horse has 4 new shoes and won't throw them on the road. William Porter's plough blade is welded and ready for another season of hitting rocks. The church will have hinges that'll hold its door for a century, assuming nobody burns the building down or the British and French don't decide to use it for target practice in whatever conflict is brewing. Dr. Morrison can lock his medicine cabinet with a key that actually works. The dozens of small repairs and creations that filled your day have rippled outward into the community, solving problems and enabling life to continue in this colonial settlement that's trying very hard to become something more permanent. Samuel has gone home to his family, probably nursing whatever new bruise or scrape he acquired today, while learning that metalworking has strong opinions about carelessness. He's getting better though, slower to injure himself, faster to learn from mistakes, more capable with each passing week. In 6 more years, he'll be a journeyman blacksmith, and you'll have successfully transferred decades of accumulated knowledge to the next generation. Or he'll get bored and run away to sea, voiding his apprenticeship contract and leaving you short a helper. The odds favour the former, but teenage boys are unpredictable variables in any long-term planning. You close the ledger, accepting that the numbers are what they are and worrying about them won't change anything. Either customers pay their accounts and you stay solvent, or they don't, and you figure out creative solutions to temporary poverty. This has been your reality for 27 years, and you've survived every previous financial crisis through some combination of skill, determination, and willingness to accept chickens as payment. You'll probably survive the next crisis too, assuming the various political tensions don't explode into violence that disrupts everything. Margaret is already in bed, a shape under blankets in the darkness across the room. The children are piled in their corner, breathing the deep, peaceful breaths of people who don't yet bear responsibility for community metalwork infrastructure. You should join them soon. Get whatever sleep you can before the rooster announces tomorrow's repetition of today's basic structure. But you're sitting here for another moment, letting the day settle, feeling the familiar aches, and contemplating the strange life you've built, or maybe that built you, in this colonial metalworking trade. Tomorrow you'll wake in darkness, coax the forge back to life, and start hammering metal again. There'll be new projects, new problems, new customers with urgent needs that require immediate attention. Your apprentice will show up late and probably bleed on something. Your back will hurt. Your hands will accumulate new burns, and you'll spend 14 more hours transforming solid metal into useful shapes through the application of heat, force, and skills you've spent a lifetime developing. This is what you do. This is who you are. Blacksmith, community lifeline, husband, father, guy who accepted a chicken as payment last week and is still not sure that was a good business decision. You stand, joints creaking their evening complaints, and blow out the candle. Darkness fills the room, broken only by the faint glow of banked coals seeping up through floorboards from your forge below. Tomorrow brings the same work, the same challenges, the same brutal routine that's defined your adult life. But honestly, you wouldn't have it any other way. This is your forge, your anvil, your family, your community, your life shaped by metal and fire and determination. The darkness is comfortable, the silence is peaceful, and in a few hours you'll do it all again, because that's what blacksmiths do. The metal won't shape itself, the community needs your skills, and somebody has to keep this colonial experiment supplied with the iron infrastructure it requires to survive and grow. That somebody is you, for better or worse, in sickness and health, for as long as your body holds up and the demand for metalwork continues. The bed waits, sleep calls, and tomorrow the anvil will sing again. The weight of the day slowly drains away as you settle into the straw mattress, feeling your body sink into the familiar contours. It's worn over years of nights just like this one. The room is dark and warm, filled with the quiet breathing of your family, and somewhere below you can almost hear the forge settling deeper into its banked slumber, holding just enough heat to make tomorrow's revival easier, resting just like you are now. Your thoughts drift and soften, the sharp edges of worry about accounts and iron shipments, and whether Samuel will ever stop injuring himself. All of it fades into something gentler, something that feels almost like contentment in the darkness. The aches in your shoulders and back become distant sensations, still there but less insistent, your body finally accepting that the work is done for today and tomorrow is its own concern. Margaret's breathing beside you is steady and peaceful. Little William makes small sleeping sounds from his corner, and Sarah has stopped moving, finally settled after her evening campaign against Bedtime. This moment, right here in the darkness, is as close to perfect as your life gets. Everyone safe, everyone home, the forge banked properly, the day's work completed, and tomorrow still far enough away that you don't have to think about it yet. Your eyes grow heavy, the darkness becoming softer somehow, wrapping around you like a warm, familiar blanket that smells of smoke and home and the life you've built through heat and hammer and determination. The last thought that drifts through your mind before sleep takes you completely is something simple and true. You did good work today, and tomorrow you'll do it again, and that's enough. The world fades to gentle darkness, the day releases you into dreams, and everything is quiet.